The night air held its breath as the chandeliers of Merivale House cast their golden glow upon the winter ball of 1873. Ladies in silks and taffetas glided across polished floors, their jewels catching light like fallen stars, while gentlemen in pristine white gloves and immaculate tailcoats engaged in the elaborate dance of society. Yet amid this constellation of wealth and breeding, one figure stood apart, as unremarkable as a sparrow among peacocks. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, daughter of the late Reverend Whitcomb of Northshire, occupied a small alcove near the refreshment table. Her gown, though neatly pressed and of a pleasant lavender hue, spoke of modest means and practical consideration rather than Parisian extravagance. The single pearl that hung from a thin silver chain at her throat, her mother's sole legacy, gleamed with quiet dignity against her skin. Her chestnut auburn hair, arranged in a simple chignon with a faded blue ribbon, lacked the elaborate curls and diamond pins that adorned the fashionable heads around her. "Miss Whitcomb appears determined to blend with the wallpaper," observed Lady Beatrice Hensley, the daughter of the Marquis of Wexford, as she snapped open her peacock feather fan. "One wonders why she persists in attending functions for which she is so manifestly unsuited." Her companion, Miss Clara Bentham, leaned closer. "Lady Merivale invited her out of Christian charity, I'm told. The girl's father left nothing but debts and an unfortunate daughter." "Christian charity?" Lady Beatrice's laughter tinkled like ice in crystal. "I rather think Lady Merivale enjoys the contrast. A plain backdrop makes the beautiful shine all the brighter." Eleanor's fingers instinctively tightened around her pearl pendant. Though beyond earshot of the cruel words, she felt the weight of their gazes, the dismissive glances, the pitying smiles, the swift turning away when she chanced to look in their direction. 3 dances had passed. Her dance card remained pristinely empty. The orchestra struck up the opening notes of a waltz. Couples formed upon the floor, gentlemen bowing, ladies curtsying. Eleanor watched as Lady Beatrice was claimed by a captain of the Queen's Guard, her golden curls bouncing with satisfaction as she took her rightful place at the center of attention. "Even the music does not wish your company," came a whisper at Eleanor's shoulder. Lady Beatrice had paused in her procession to the dance floor, her eyes glittering with malice. "Perhaps you might find more appropriate entertainment in the servants' hall." Eleanor's cheeks flamed, but she lifted her chin. "I thank you for your concern, Lady Beatrice, but I find observation quite satisfying." "How fortunate," Lady Beatrice replied, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "For it appears observation shall be your only occupation tonight." The captain led Beatrice away, leaving Eleanor burning with humiliation. It was then she resolved to depart. She would claim a headache, find her aunt's carriage, and retreat to the modest townhouse they rented in a less fashionable quarter of London. Her absence would cause no ripple in this glittering sea. As Eleanor moved toward the exit, a sudden hush fell over the assembly. The dancers faltered, the music seemed to catch its breath, and all eyes turned toward the grand entrance. Eleanor turned as well, curiosity momentarily overcoming her distress. He stood like a living sculpture at the threshold of the ballroom, tall, imposing, with shoulders that bore the weight of ancient titles and vast estates with effortless dignity. His raven-black hair was swept back from a face that poets might describe as hewn from marble, all clean lines and perfect angles, softened only by the surprising fullness of his lips. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, deep blue and penetrating, surveying the room with aristocratic detachment. Arthur, Duke of Ravensshire, had arrived. "His Grace honours us," murmured Lady Merivale, hastening to greet him. "We had not dared to hope." "Forgive my tardiness," the Duke replied, his voice deep and measured. "Parliamentary matters delayed me." His entrance caused a ripple of excitement among the unmarried ladies and their ambitious mothers. The most eligible bachelor in England, with a lineage older than most of the noble houses present, had deigned to join their gathering. Lady Beatrice preened visibly, abandoning her dance partner to position herself more advantageously. Eleanor watched this pageant with a mixture of fascination and resignation. Such a man existed in a realm utterly separate from her own. She renewed her determination to depart before witnessing any more of what she could never possess. She had taken but 3 steps toward the door when Lady Beatrice's voice rang out, deliberately pitched to carry, "Your Grace, we were just remarking how peculiar it is for some to attend gatherings where they remain utterly unwanted." The ballroom held its breath. Eleanor froze, mortification washing over her in a burning wave. The Duke's gaze followed Lady Beatrice's meaningful glance. For one terrible moment, his eyes locked with Eleanor's. She expected to see the same dismissal she had endured all evening. Instead, something unreadable flickered across his austere features. He moved toward her with the deliberate grace of a predator. The crowd parted before him, whispers erupting in his wake. When he stood before her, Eleanor felt herself trembling, clutching her mother's pearl as if it might shield her. "You appear to be leaving, miss." His voice was low, meant for her alone. "Whitcomb," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy. "Eleanor Whitcomb, Your Grace. Miss Whitcomb." He considered her name as though tasting a rare wine. Then, to the astonishment of all present, he extended his hand. "Would you honor me with this dance?" The orchestra faltered. Lady Beatrice's fan snapped shut with a crack like gunfire. Eleanor began, certain this must be some elaborate jest. The Duke leaned closer. "They are watching," he murmured. "Let them." The Duke's hand remained extended between them, an offering so unprecedented it seemed to Eleanor that time itself had suspended its relentless march. His eyes, those piercing sapphires set in a face of controlled austerity, betrayed no hint of mockery. Indeed, there resided within them something that, in a less formidable man, might have been called tenderness. "Your Grace," Eleanor managed at last, her voice scarcely above a whisper, "I fear you mistake me for someone of consequence." A smile, brief as lightning yet transformative, touched his lips. "I mistake nothing, Miss Whitcomb. Will you dance?" The assembled spectators held a collective breath. Lady Beatrice's face had contorted into a mask of such incandescent rage that her companion, Miss Bentham, took an instinctive step away from her. Lady Merivale clutched her husband's arm, her expression vacillating between scandal and fascination. Eleanor, aware that each passing second deepened the extraordinary nature of the moment, placed her trembling hand in his. "I should be honored, Your Grace." His fingers closed around hers, warm, firm, and startlingly intimate. With a grave nod that acknowledged the magnitude of what was transpiring between them, the Duke of Ravensshire led Eleanor to the center of the ballroom floor. The orchestra, sensing the tension, resumed their waltz with renewed vigor, as if the music might provide some semblance of normality to this breach of social order. "They will talk," Eleanor whispered, as his hand settled at her waist, the proprietary weight of it both terrifying and exhilarating. The Duke's gaze swept the room, noting every gaping face, every widened eye, before returning to rest upon her own. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "let them watch." And then they were dancing. Eleanor had learned the waltz from a country dancing master, practiced in her father's modest parlor with her cousin as partner. She had never imagined herself performing the steps in the arms of England's most eligible bachelor before an audience of the ton's elite. Yet her body remembered the rhythm, and the Duke led with such assured grace that she found herself following as though they had danced together 100 times before. "You move beautifully," he observed, guiding her through a turn that sent her skirts swirling about her ankles. "You are too kind, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, her cheeks flushed with more than exertion. "Though I confess myself at a loss to understand why you bestow such kindness upon me." "Must kindness have reason?" he countered, his expression unreadable once more. "In my experience," Eleanor said with unexpected frankness, "it rarely comes without one." Something sparked in the depths of his eyes. Approval, perhaps. "A cynic, Miss Whitcomb? How refreshing." "Not a cynic, Your Grace, merely a student of observation." "And what do your observations tell you of me?" Eleanor hesitated, then answered with the honesty that had been both her salvation and her curse, "That you are a man who delights in defying expectation, that you find amusement in the discomfort of others, and that you are accustomed to using your considerable power to create precisely the effect you desire." The Duke's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Am I so transparent?" "To one who has spent a lifetime watching from the periphery," Eleanor replied, "the center often reveals more than it intends." A thoughtful silence fell between them as they continued their circuit of the floor. The initial shock of their pairing had given way to a buzzing speculation that Eleanor could almost hear, like the humming of distant bees. "You have been watching me, then?" he asked at length. Eleanor flushed deeper. "I have been watching everyone, Your Grace. It is the occupation of those deemed unworthy of participation." His hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "And who deemed you thus?" "Society," she answered simply. "The same society that now watches us with such avid interest." The music was drawing to its conclusion. Eleanor felt a pang of loss, knowing that when the last note faded, so too would this extraordinary interlude. She would return to her corner, to her invisibility, with nothing but this memory to warm the long, cold evenings ahead. "Society," the Duke said, his voice taking on an edge she had not heard before, "is a collection of fools, bound by rules of their own invention. I have never cared for its judgments. a luxury afforded by your station, your grace, a necessity born of my nature, Miss Whitcomb." The waltz ended. Custom dictated that he should bow, she should curtsy, and they should part. Instead, the Duke retained her hand, and with a deliberateness that could not be mistaken, raised it to his lips. The gasp that rippled through the ballroom was audible even above the final strains of the orchestra. "I believe," he said, his breath warm against her knuckles, "that we have provided sufficient entertainment for one evening. Would you permit me to escort you to refreshment?" Eleanor, beyond speech, could only nod. As he led her from the dance floor, she caught sight of Lady Beatrice, whose beautiful face had transformed into something almost grotesque with fury. At her side, Miss Bentham was already whispering feverishly, no doubt composing the first draft of the scandal that would sweep through London by morning. "Your kindness has made me an object of enmity," Eleanor murmured, inclining her head toward Lady Beatrice. The Duke followed her gaze and smiled, a cold, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "Lady Beatrice Hensley has been an object of my avoidance for 3 seasons. Her enmity is a badge you should wear with pride." "I fear that pride comes at considerable cost," Eleanor replied, thinking of the precarious nature of her position in society, dependent as she was upon her aunt's charity and goodwill. The Duke paused, turning to face her fully. In the golden light of the chandeliers, his face seemed suddenly vulnerable, stripped of its customary hauteur. "Some things, Miss Whitcomb," he said quietly, "are worth any cost." From across the room, the door to the terrace opened. A messenger in livery entered, scanning the crowd with urgency. His eyes found the Duke, and he moved toward them with purpose. "Your Grace," the servant said with a bow, "a matter of utmost importance requires your immediate attention." The Duke's expression hardened once more into its mask of aristocratic reserve. He turned to Eleanor with a bow that, while perfectly correct, seemed to contain a reluctance she had not expected. "Duty calls, Miss Whitcomb. I must beg your indulgence." "Of course, Your Grace," she replied, curtsying deeply. As he turned to follow the messenger, he paused, his gaze lingering on her face as though committing it to memory. "We shall meet again," he said. Not a question, but a promise. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone amid a sea of curious eyes and wagging tongues. The pearl at her throat seemed suddenly heavier, like a talisman weighted with unfathomable significance. The evening had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. Lady Beatrice approached, her smile sharp as a blade. "My dear Miss Whitcomb," she purred, her voice carrying to those nearby. "How remarkable that the Duke should single you out. One wonders what unusual qualities you possess to attract such distinguished attention." Eleanor felt the sting beneath the words, the insinuation that no honorable interest could explain the Duke's behavior. Before she could formulate a reply that would neither provoke nor demean, a footman appeared at her side, bowing. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, offering a small silver salver. "His Grace asked that this be delivered to you." Upon the salver rested a single folded note, sealed with red wax bearing the Ravenshire crest. The buzz of conversation around them intensified. With trembling fingers, Eleanor accepted the missive. Lady Beatrice's fan snapped open with furious precision. "How intriguing," she said, her voice brittle with spite. "A correspondence already. One might almost suspect a prior acquaintance." Eleanor broke the seal. Within, written in a bold, masculine hand, were words that caused her heart to leap into her throat. "Tomorrow noon, Hyde Park. The matter is not concluded." Dawn broke over London with a misty reluctance, as though the night clung to the city with spectral fingers. Eleanor had not slept. How could she, when the events of the previous evening played in ceaseless repetition behind her closed eyelids? The dance, the touch of the Duke's hand at her waist, the note that now lay beneath her pillow like a talisman against disbelief. She rose with the first pale light, moving to her window to gaze upon the modest street below. A solitary lamplighter made his morning rounds, extinguishing the gas lamps that had guided night travellers. In the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, 6 chimes that seemed to echo the tumultuous beating of her heart. "This cannot be real," she whispered to herself, fingers instinctively finding the pearl at her throat. "Such things do not happen to women like me." And yet it had happened. The most sought-after bachelor in England had not only danced with her, but had summoned her to a meeting. The impropriety of it sent a shiver down her spine, half fear, half exhilaration. To meet a gentleman without chaperone would be scandalous enough. To meet the Duke of Ravenshire would be ruinous if discovered. She should refuse. The sensible Eleanor, daughter of a clergyman raised on principles of propriety and caution, knew this with absolute certainty. Yet another voice, one she scarcely recognized as her own, whispered that some opportunities came but once in a lifetime, and to turn away from them required a different kind of courage than she possessed. At breakfast, her aunt, a widow of modest means who had taken Eleanor in after her father's death, regarded her with unusual scrutiny. "You seem altered this morning, niece," Mrs. Pembroke observed, stirring her tea with methodical precision. "Did you enjoy Lady Merivale's ball?" Eleanor concentrated on buttering her toast, afraid her face might betray her. "It was pleasant enough, Aunt." "Only pleasant? I had thought it might prove more diverting, given what I have heard this morning." Eleanor's knife clattered against her plate. "What have you heard?" Mrs. Pembroke's lips curved into a smile that contained both satisfaction and concern. "That my previously overlooked niece was the object of most particular attention from the Duke of Devonshire himself. That he not only danced with you, but did so in a manner that suggested familiarity." "There was no familiarity," Eleanor protested, cheeks burning. "His Grace was merely kind to a wallflower, nothing more." "Dukes," Mrs. Pembroke said dryly, "are not known for random acts of kindness toward penniless young women. You would do well to remember that, Eleanor." "What do you suggest I remember, Aunt? That I am beneath his notice? That his attention can only signify improper intentions?" Eleanor's voice rose with uncharacteristic heat. "Perhaps he simply wished to dance." Mrs. Pembroke set down her cup with a decisive click. "Men of his station do nothing without purpose, Eleanor. I do not suggest his intentions are dishonorable. Indeed, I pray they are not. But neither are they likely to be of the sort that end in matrimony. Guard your heart, child. It is your only true possession in this world." Eleanor lapsed into silence, appetite gone. Her aunt's warning echoed her own midnight doubts, yet did nothing to diminish her resolve to keep the appointment. If nothing else, she owed him the courtesy of an explanation as to why further contact between them could not be countenanced. At 11:30, she donned her best walking dress, a modest garment of deep blue wool with minimal trimming, and her one good bonnet. "I'm going to visit the lending library, Aunt," she announced, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Miss Hartford mentioned a new volume of poetry that has just arrived." Mrs. Pembroke nodded absently, engrossed in her correspondence. "Take Peters with you," she said, referring to their elderly manservant. "A young woman should not walk unaccompanied." "Peters is needed to collect your medicines from the apothecary," Eleanor reminded her, blessing the coincidence that had her aunt's rheumatism flaring that very morning. "I shall be perfectly safe in broad daylight." Before her aunt could object further, Eleanor was out the door and into the crisp air of late winter. Hyde Park was a 20-minute walk from their modest townhouse, time enough for Eleanor to compose her speech. She would thank him for his kindness, explain the impossibility of their acquaintance, and bid him good day. Simple, dignified, final. The park was relatively quiet at this hour, the fashionable crowd not yet arrived for their afternoon promenade. Eleanor made her way toward the Serpentine, where the note had specified they should meet. Her gloved hands were clenched so tightly that her fingers ached within their leather confines, and then she saw him. He stood at the water's edge, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. He wore no hat, and the winter sunlight caught the raven blackness of his hair, turning it momentarily to midnight blue. His greatcoat, a masterpiece of tailoring in charcoal wool, emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. As though sensing her presence, he turned. Their eyes met across the expanse of frozen grass, and Eleanor felt her carefully prepared speech dissolve into incoherence. He came toward her with long, purposeful strides. She noticed he carried something, a book, bound in leather the color of burgundy wine. When he reached her, he bowed with exquisite correctness, though his eyes never left her face. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, his voice as she remembered it, deep, resonant, with the subtle authority of a man accustomed to command. "I feared you might not come." "I nearly did not, Your Grace," she admitted. "Indeed, I have come only to explain why we cannot meet again." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I am doubly grateful for your presence, as it allows me the opportunity to persuade you otherwise." "There can be no persuasion where impossibility exists," Eleanor replied, striving for firmness. "Surely you must see that our stations in life are too disparate for any form of association to be appropriate." "I see nothing of the sort," the Duke countered. "I see only a woman of intelligence and grace who does not simper or scheme, who speaks her mind with refreshing candor, and whose company I find more stimulating than any I have enjoyed in recent memory." Eleanor felt her resolve wavering beneath the intensity of his regard. "Your Grace is too kind, but—" "Arthur," he interrupted, "when we are alone, I should like you to call me Arthur." The intimacy of the request stole her breath. "I could not possibly—" "You could," he insisted gently. "You need only decide that you will." A gust of wind stirred the bare branches above them, sending a shower of droplets from the previous night's rain pattering down around them. One fell upon the Duke's cheek, lingering like a tear. Without thinking, Eleanor raised her hand as if to brush it away, then froze as she realized the impropriety of the gesture. The Duke, Arthur, captured her hand in his before she could withdraw it. Even through their gloves she felt the warmth of his touch, the strength of his fingers as they enclosed hers. "Do you know why I asked you to dance last night, Miss Whitcomb?" he asked, his voice low and intent. "I assumed it was out of pity," she answered honestly, "or perhaps to thwart Lady Beatrice's cruelty." "Neither," he said firmly. "I asked you to dance because for the past 3 seasons I have observed a society that values appearance over substance, wealth over character, and ambition over genuine feeling. I have been pursued, flattered, manipulated, but never once seen for myself, until I saw you standing apart, watching with those extraordinary eyes that miss nothing." Eleanor stared at him, scarcely able to comprehend his words. "You noticed me before last night?" "I noticed you at Lady Ashbury's musicale in January," he said with a wry smile. "You were the only person in the room who appeared to be listening to the music rather than calculating advantages. And then again, at the Wilsons' dinner, where you sat beside old Admiral Blackwood and actually attended to his stories while the rest of the table ignored him." "I had no idea," Eleanor breathed, astonished that this man, of all men, had been watching her. "I have been gathering my courage," he admitted, the confession all the more striking for coming from one who seemed to embody assurance. "Last night, when I saw how they treated you, how that viper Beatrice sought to wound you, I could no longer remain silent." He released her hand then only to offer her the book he carried. "I brought you this," he said, "a token of my esteem, and perhaps a beginning." Eleanor accepted the volume with trembling fingers. The leather binding was soft with age and use. The gold lettering on its spine faded to a gentle gleam. "Collected Poems of John Donne." "It was my mother's," the Duke said quietly, "her favorite. I hoped you might enjoy it as she did." The gift, personal, thoughtful, significant, struck Eleanor with a force she could not have anticipated. That he should entrust her with something so precious seemed to defy all logic, all social expectation. "Your Grace, Arthur," she corrected, the name feeling foreign yet right upon her lips. "I am deeply honored, but I fear you risk much by associating with me. I have no fortune, no connections, nothing to recommend me to the world you inhabit. And that," he said with sudden vehemence, "is precisely why I wish to know you better, because you see value in what is, not what appears to be, because you stand apart from a world I have grown to despise." A carriage appeared on the path behind them, its wheels crunching on gravel. Eleanor stepped back, the spell of their conversation momentarily broken by the reminder that they stood in a public place, however deserted it might seem. "I must go," she said urgently. "If we are seen, when may I see you again?" the Duke asked, making no move to detain her physically, though his gaze held her as surely as a touch. "It would not be wise," Eleanor began, clutching the book to her chest. "Wisdom," he interrupted with a smile that transformed his austere features into something approaching boyish charm, "is greatly overrated. Tomorrow, same time?" She should refuse. Every dictate of prudence and self-preservation demanded it. Yet the look in his eyes, hopeful, vulnerable beneath the aristocratic confidence, undid her. "Tomorrow," she agreed, hardly believing her own temerity. "But we cannot continue thus indefinitely. People will talk." "Let them," he said simply. Then, with a formal bow that contradicted the intimacy of their exchange, he added, "Until tomorrow, Miss Whitcomb." Eleanor hurried away, the precious book cradled against her heart. Behind her, she felt his gaze following, warming her like sunlight on a winter's day. She did not look back, afraid that if she did, she might never find the strength to leave. In the pocket of her dress, where she had tucked it before leaving home, a letter crinkled with each hurried step, a missive delivered that morning from her cousin in the country, bearing news she had not yet shared with her aunt. News that would soon force her departure from London, from society, from him. The letter felt like lead, weighing against her newfound joy with the leaden reality of her circumstances. How cruel that fate should grant her this extraordinary encounter, only to snatch away the possibility of its continuation before it had properly begun. Tomorrow, she would tell him. Tomorrow, she would say goodbye. Eleanor awoke to the sound of urgent knocking. The pale light of dawn had barely crept past her curtains when her aunt's maid burst into the chamber, face flushed with excitement. "Miss, oh miss, you must come quickly. The entire house is in an uproar." Hastily donning a dressing gown over her nightclothes, Eleanor followed the breathless servant downstairs to find her aunt in the modest parlor, surrounded by an explosion of flowers. Roses in deep crimson, lilies of pristine white, violets and forget-me-nots arranged in perfect harmony. The modest room had been transformed into a veritable garden. "Eleanor," Mrs. Pembroke said, her voice trembling between disapproval and awe, "what have you done to attract such attention?" "I cannot say," Eleanor stammered, though her racing heart betrayed the falsehood. Only one man possessed both the audacity and the resources for such a gesture. The maid thrust forward a small envelope bearing a familiar seal. "This came with them, miss. The deliveryman said there were strict instructions it was to be placed in your hand alone." With fingers that refused steadiness, Eleanor broke the wax seal. The note within contained just 3 lines in that now familiar bold hand. "The flowers pale beside your own quiet beauty. Until noon, A." "Well," her aunt demanded, peering over spectacles that magnified her suspicious gaze, "who sends such an extravagance to a young woman of modest circumstances?" Eleanor folded the note carefully. "A gentleman I met at Lady Merivale's ball," she admitted. "It is merely a courtesy." "A courtesy," Mrs. Pembroke echoed, gesturing at the floral abundance. "Eleanor, this is a declaration. No gentleman sends flowers of such quality and quantity without serious intent, or without serious impropriety in mind," came a new voice, sharp with disapproval. Eleanor turned to find her cousin, Mr. James Hartford, standing in the doorway. His travelling coat and mud-spattered boots suggested he had only just arrived from the country, yet his expression of righteous indignation was already firmly in place. "Cousin James," she said, surprise momentarily overcoming her dismay at his unexpected appearance, "we did not expect you until next week." "Evidently," he replied with a meaningful glance at the flowers. "It seems my arrival is fortuitously timed. I received your aunt's letter expressing concerns about certain rumours circulating through London." Eleanor cast a betrayed glance at her aunt, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I thought it prudent to seek counsel," Mrs. Pembroke explained. "James is, after all, your nearest male relation. And as such," James continued, removing his gloves with deliberate precision, "I am responsible for ensuring you do not fall victim to the machinations of fortune hunters or worse." "There are no machinations," Eleanor protested. "Merely a kindness shown to one who—" "A kindness?" James interrupted, his thin face flushing. "My dear cousin, the Duke of Ravenshire does not distribute kindness to young women of no particular fortune or connection without expectation of return. His reputation, while not openly scandalous, suggests a man accustomed to pursuing his pleasures without regard for consequence." Eleanor felt a surge of indignation. "You know nothing of his character." "And you do?" James countered, stepping closer. "After one dance and what else? Have you met him unchaperoned? Has he made advances?" The flush that rose to Eleanor's cheeks provided answer enough. James's expression hardened into something close to contempt. "As I feared, you have been drawn into a disastrous indiscretion. Well, it ends now. I have come to escort you back to Northshire immediately." "I am not a child to be commanded," Eleanor said, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished to project. "I have an appointment. With the Duke, no doubt," James cut in. "I shall attend in your stead and explain that any further communication would be directed through me as your guardian." "You are not my guardian," Eleanor reminded him, clutching at this technical truth. "I am of age, but dependent upon the charity of this household," he replied mercilessly. "Unless you wish to seek employment as a governess or companion, positions that would be forever closed to you, should even a whisper of impropriety attach to your name." Mrs. Pembroke laid a restraining hand on James's arm. "Perhaps we might discuss this privately," she suggested, with a meaningful glance at the servants who hovered in ill-concealed fascination. James nodded stiffly. "Indeed. Eleanor, you will join us in the study in 15 minutes. Until then, I suggest you contemplate the precariousness of your situation." Left alone amidst the sea of flowers, Eleanor found herself trembling, not with fear, but with a surprising anger. All her life she had submitted to the dictates of others, her father's austere expectations, her aunt's cautious charity, society's dismissive judgments. Now, when offered the first taste of something extraordinary, she was expected once again to yield without protest. The Duke's book of poetry lay on her bedside table, where she had placed it the night before. She had spent hours tracing his mother's name inscribed on the flyleaf, reading the passages marked with faint pencil strokes, imagining his hands holding the same pages. It was more personal than any bouquet, a glimpse into his inner world that the flowers, magnificent though they were, could never provide. Returning to her chamber, Eleanor dressed with unusual care in her blue walking dress. She secured her mother's pearl at her throat, and after a moment's hesitation, tucked the precious book into her reticule. Then, with a glance at the clock that showed only 8:30, she made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew her steady, obedient nature. She would not wait for her cousin's judgment. She would not miss her appointment with the Duke. She would, for perhaps the first time in her life, seize what she wanted, regardless of consequence. The servants were occupied with James's arrival. No one noticed as Eleanor slipped out through the kitchen garden. The morning was crisp, the sky a perfect February blue. She had hours before her appointed meeting with the Duke, but she could not remain in that house a moment longer. Suffocating under the weight of others' expectations, she walked without clear destination, her mind churning with questions and possibilities. What would become of her if she defied her family? What would become of her if she did not? The Duke's interest, however genuine, could not possibly lead to the outcome her cousin so feared and derided, marriage. Yet nor was it the sordid arrangement James had implied. It was something without precedent in her experience, a connection that defied conventional classification. Lost in thought, she found herself in a part of London she did not recognize. Narrower streets, shabbier buildings, the air thick with coal smoke and less savory odors. A sense of unease prickled at the back of her neck as she realized several rough-looking men had taken notice of her obviously out-of-place appearance. "Lost, dearie?" called one, his gap-toothed grin more menacing than friendly. Eleanor quickened her pace, heart hammering. She turned down a side street, hoping to find her way back toward more familiar territory, only to discover it was a dead end. When she turned to retrace her steps, two men blocked her path. "Fancy lady like you shouldn't be wandering alone," said the taller of the two, his eyes assessing her with calculated avarice. Dangerous for a pretty thing without protection. Eleanor clutched her reticule tighter, the book within suddenly as precious as her own safety. "I am expected," she said, striving for composure she did not feel. "My companions will be looking for me." The men exchanged amused glances. "Hear that, Tom? She's expected. Well, we wouldn't want to keep your friends waiting, would we? Perhaps we should escort you for a small consideration." "I have nothing of value," Eleanor replied, backing away until she felt the cold brick wall behind her. "That pearl looks valuable enough," the one called Tom said, reaching toward her throat. Eleanor flinched away, her hand flying protectively to her mother's necklace. "Please," she began, but whatever plea she might have uttered died on her lips as a new voice cut through the tense tableau. "The lady is under my protection." All three turned to find a carriage at the entrance to the alley, and beside it a figure whose commanding presence seemed to fill the narrow space. The Duke of Ravenshire stepped forward, his expression a study in controlled fury. The would-be thieves, recognizing authority when they saw it, muttered hasty apologies and retreated with surprising speed. Within moments, they had vanished around a corner, leaving Eleanor alone with her unexpected rescuer. "Your Grace," she breathed, relief and embarrassment warring within her. "How did you—" "I was on my way to Parliament when I saw you walking alone," he explained, closing the distance between them with swift strides. "I ordered my coachman to follow at a distance, concerned for your safety. It appears my concern was justified." His gaze swept over her, assessing for harm. Finding none, the tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. "You are uninjured, only startled," Eleanor assured him, though her trembling belied the calm she attempted to project. Without warning, he took her gloved hands in his. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice gentler than she had yet heard it. "Come, my carriage is waiting. Let me take you home." Home. The word conjured not comfort but constraint. James's disapproving face, her aunt's anxious hovering, the implicit threat of being sent away from London, from him. "I cannot go home," she confessed. "Not yet." Something in her tone must have conveyed her distress, for he studied her face with newfound intensity. "What has happened, Eleanor?" The use of her given name, so intimate and yet so natural on his lips, broke through her final reserve. "My cousin has arrived from the country," she explained. "He knows of our acquaintance, or suspects it, and intends to put an end to it. They wish to send me away from London immediately." The Duke's expression darkened. "On what grounds does he presume to dictate your movements?" "On the grounds that I am dependent upon his sister's charity," Eleanor said simply, "and that an association with you can only lead to my ruin." For a moment something like pain flashed across his aristocratic features. Then, with a decisive nod, he offered his arm. "Come with me," he said. "Not home, not yet, but somewhere we might speak freely." Reason dictated that she refuse. Propriety demanded it. Yet Eleanor found herself placing her hand upon his arm, allowing him to lead her toward his waiting carriage. As he handed her inside, the pearl at her throat caught the morning light, gleaming with an iridescence that seemed to Eleanor like a sign, though whether of hope or warning she could not say. The carriage door closed behind them with a sound of finality. Through the window Eleanor glimpsed the London sky, vast and blue and full of possibility. The Duke took his place opposite her, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me everything," he said. And as the carriage moved forward, bearing her toward an uncertain destination, Eleanor found herself crossing a threshold from which there could be no return. The Duke's carriage rolled through London's streets at a deliberate pace, its plush interior forming an island of privacy amid the bustling city. Eleanor sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, aware of the impropriety of her situation, yet unable to summon the will to end it. Across from her, the Duke watched with an intensity that should have discomfited her, but instead offered a curious reassurance. "Your cousin's arrival was unexpected," he asked at length, breaking the silence that had fallen after her hurried explanation of the morning's events. "Not entirely," Eleanor admitted. "He was due to visit next week. My aunt must have sent for him earlier upon hearing the rumors." "Rumors?" the Duke repeated, his mouth curving into a sardonic smile. "London thrives on them like a garden on rain. Tell me, what dire predictions do they make regarding our acquaintance?" Eleanor flushed. "I have not heard them directly, but my cousin seemed convinced your attentions could only signify dishonorable intentions." "Dishonorable?" he echoed, the word sharp with disdain. "The greatest dishonor in this affair is the presumption that you require protection from your own judgment." "It is not merely presumption," Eleanor said quietly. "My position is still precarious. I have neither fortune nor family to shield me from consequence. And I am the consequence from which you most require shielding?" There was a dangerous edge to his voice now, though Eleanor sensed his anger was not directed at her. "According to my cousin, yes." The Duke leaned forward, his gaze holding hers with hypnotic force. "And what do you believe, Eleanor? Do you fear me? Do you imagine I orchestrated our meeting with some nefarious design?" "No," she answered without hesitation. "But that does not alter the reality of my circumstances. I am dependent upon the goodwill of others for my very existence." "Not necessarily," he countered, a curious tension entering his bearing. "There are alternatives." Before Eleanor could inquire as to the nature of these alternatives, the carriage drew to a halt. Glancing out the window, she was surprised to find they had stopped before an elegant townhouse in one of London's most fashionable squares. "Where are we?" she asked, apprehension mingling with curiosity. "My London residence," the Duke replied, watching her reaction closely. "I thought we might continue our conversation without fear of interruption or observation." Eleanor stiffened. To enter a gentleman's home unchaperoned would cross a line beyond redemption. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly—" "My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, is in residence," he added quickly, correctly interpreting her alarm, "as is my secretary and no less than 15 servants. I assure you, your reputation will suffer no further damage than it already has by our carriage ride." Still she hesitated, weighing propriety against necessity. The Duke's expression softened fractionally. "Eleanor," he said, "I have no desire to compromise you further, but neither can I in good conscience return you to those who would deny you agency in your own life. I ask only for an hour of conversation in surroundings where we need not fear the prying eyes that seem to haunt every public space in this city." His logic was impeccable, his manner respectful, and beneath it all lay a current of something Eleanor had rarely encountered in her life: genuine concern for her well-being, her happiness. With a small nod, she signaled her acceptance. The Duke descended first, then handed her down from the carriage with careful formality. The townhouse before them rose 4 stories, its Portland stone facade speaking of understated elegance rather than ostentatious display. A liveried footman opened the door as they approached, bowing deeply. "Jenkins," the Duke said, "please inform Mrs. Winters that we have a guest who will be taking tea in the blue drawing-room." "At once, Your Grace," the servant replied, his expression betraying no surprise at the unexpected arrival of a young woman at this unconventional hour. Eleanor found herself led through a marbled entrance hall and up a sweeping staircase to a room that deserved its designation. Various shades of blue dominated the decor, from the pale cerulean of the silk-covered walls to the deeper azure of the velvet drapes. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating furnishings of exquisite taste and quality. "Please be seated," the Duke invited, gesturing toward a delicate settee positioned near the fireplace, where flames danced cheerfully against the morning chill. Eleanor perched on the edge of the seat, too aware of her surroundings to relax completely. The Duke remained standing, his tall figure silhouetted against the window as he gazed out at the square below. "I find myself in an unusual position," he said at length, turning to face her. "For the first time in recent memory, I am uncertain how to proceed." The admission, so at odds with his customary assurance, caught Eleanor by surprise. "I confess I share your uncertainty," she replied. A fleeting smile crossed his features. "At least we are equally adrift." He moved to take a seat in the chair opposite her, close enough for conversation yet maintaining a respectful distance. When I approached you at Lady Merivale's ball, I acted on impulse, a rarity for one who has learned to calculate every public move. I knew my attention would provoke speculation, but I underestimated the swiftness with which that speculation would transform into action against you. It is not your fault, Eleanor said. The world we inhabit assigns different values to men and women. Your reputation may weather 1,000 storms. Mine can be destroyed by a single raindrop. An eloquent assessment, he acknowledged, though it does little to reconcile me to the injustice. Before their conversation could continue, a knock at the door heralded the arrival of tea. Mrs. Winters, a stately woman of advanced years with a face as starched as her apron, supervised the arrangement of the service with military precision. Her keen eyes assessed Eleanor with undisguised curiosity before settling on the Duke with an expression that managed to convey both respect and admonition. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" she inquired, her tone suggesting there had better not be. "That will be all, Mrs. Winters," the Duke replied, a hint of amusement softening his aristocratic mien. "Miss Whitcomb and I have matters of importance to discuss." "Indeed, sir," the housekeeper responded, with a significant glance at the open door which she deliberately left ajar upon her departure. Once alone, or as alone as propriety would now allow, the Duke leaned forward to pour the tea himself, an informal gesture that spoke of comfort with domestic tasks typically left to servants. "You mentioned alternatives," Eleanor said, accepting the offered cup with a murmured thanks. "What did you mean?" The Duke's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. "I meant," he said carefully, "that dependence upon your relatives is not your only option." Eleanor waited, sensing there was more he wished to say, but was approaching with uncharacteristic caution. "I could, for instance, establish a trust," he continued, "a modest income that would allow you to maintain a small establishment of your own, independent of your cousin's charity or authority." The cup trembled in Eleanor's grasp. "You would make me your dependent instead?" His eyes flashed. "No, I would make you independent of all, including myself. The funds, once established, would be legally yours without condition or expectation." The offer was breathtaking in its generosity and utterly impossible to accept. "I could never—" "You could," he interrupted, echoing his words from their meeting in the park. "You need only decide that you will." "The world would assume the worst," Eleanor said, placing her cup on the table to hide the tremor in her hands, "that I had earned such generosity in the most degrading manner possible. The world," he countered with sudden vehemence, "has never shown you the regard you deserve. Why should its judgment matter now?" "Because I must live in it," she answered simply. "Because unlike you, I have no fortress of privilege to shield me from its cruelties." The Duke rose abruptly and paced to the window, his back a rigid line of controlled frustration. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost as though he addressed himself rather than her. "There is another alternative." Eleanor waited, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. He turned to face her fully, his expression grave yet determined. "Marriage." The word hung in the air, impossible and extraordinary. Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard or misunderstood. "Your Grace?" "Arthur," he corrected gently. "And yes, I said marriage, to me." "But that's absurd," Eleanor breathed, rising to her feet as though physical elevation might help her comprehend this incomprehensible suggestion. "You cannot possibly wish to—" "I can," he said, closing the distance between them with 2 swift strides. "I do." "Why?" The question escaped her before she could temper it with politeness or prevarication. A shadow of vulnerability crossed his face, so brief she might have imagined it had she not been watching so closely. "Because in a world of artifice, you offer authenticity. Because your mind intrigues me as much as your beauty. Because the thought of you being sent away, of never seeing you again, is suddenly intolerable." Eleanor shook her head, not in refusal but in disbelief. "We scarcely know each other." "We know enough," he insisted. "The rest we would discover together." "The scandal would be tremendous," she murmured, though even as she spoke she knew this was the least of the impediments between them. "Let it be," he said with a dismissive gesture. "I have weathered worse for lesser causes." Eleanor turned away, her thoughts in turmoil. The impossibility of it all threatened to overwhelm her. A duke proposing marriage to a penniless clergyman's daughter after 2 brief meetings. It defied all logic, all social convention. And yet, the sincerity in his eyes, the tension in his bearing suggested this was no casual offer, no impulsive gesture. "There is something you do not know," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I received yesterday, before our meeting." The Duke waited, his silence an invitation to continue. "A letter from my cousin in the country," Eleanor explained, retrieving it from her reticule with reluctant fingers. "Not James, but his brother Thomas. He writes that the cottage where I lived with my father, The only home I have ever known is to be sold to satisfy his creditors. The few possessions I left behind will be auctioned within the fortnight." She handed him the letter, watching as he scanned its contents, his expression darkening with each line. "This is unconscionable," he said at length. "Your father was a clergyman, a man of God. To strip his daughter of even these modest comforts—" "He left debts," Eleanor said simply. "More than anyone realized, the church requires restitution before a new vicar can be installed." The Duke folded the letter with deliberate precision. "All the more reason for you to accept my offer. Either of them. A trust would secure your immediate needs. Marriage would secure your future." Eleanor shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I cannot accept charity, however generously offered, and I cannot accept a proposal born of pity or chivalrous impulse, however sincere." "Do you think that is why I offer?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I think you are a good man," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I think you see someone in distress and wish to alleviate that distress. It is admirable, but it is not a foundation for marriage." For a long moment he regarded her in silence, something unreadable shifting in the depths of his eyes. Then, with careful deliberation, he moved to a writing desk positioned near the window. From a drawer he extracted a small box of polished wood. "This," he said, returning to stand before her, "belonged to my mother. She instructed that it should pass to the woman I chose as my wife." He opened the box to reveal a ring of surpassing elegance, a single perfect sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum that gleamed with quiet dignity. "I have carried it with me for 10 years, he continued, "through 3 seasons of determined matchmaking by every ambitious mother in London. I have watched beautiful women, accomplished women, wealthier women than I could possibly require, parade before me in an endless procession of calculated availability. Not once did I consider offering this ring to any of them." He lifted it from its velvet nest, the blue stone catching the light like a captured star. "This is not impulse, Eleanor. This is not pity. This is recognition of a woman whose worth transcends the shallow metrics by which society measures value." Eleanor felt tears threatening, a pressure behind her eyes that she fought to contain. "I am sensible of the honor you do me," she whispered, falling back on formality as a shield against overwhelming emotion. "But I cannot accept without being certain of your heart as well as your admiration." With exquisite care, the Duke returned the ring to its box and closed the lid. "Then we shall wait," he said, his voice steady, though something flickered in his expression, disappointment perhaps, or resignation. "I am a patient man when the prize is worth the waiting." A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted the charged moment. Jenkins stood at attention, his face a study in professional neutrality. "Your Grace, a Mr. Hartford has called. He insists upon seeing you on a matter of utmost urgency." The Duke's expression hardened. "Eleanor's cousin, I presume." "He did not state his business, sir, but he appears most determined." Eleanor felt cold dread replace the warmth that had begun to blossom within her. "He must have followed us," she said, "or guessed where we might go." "He is not alone," Jenkins added delicately. "There is a lady with him, a Mrs. Pembroke, I believe, and a gentleman in clerical attire." "A vicar?" the Duke inquired, his brow furrowing. Jenkins nodded. "The Reverend Stillwell, according to his card." Eleanor's heart sank. Reverend Stillwell was her father's former colleague and her own godfather, a man whose moral authority had shaped her childhood and whose disappointment she could scarcely bear to contemplate. "They have come to take me back," she said, resignation coloring her tone. "To save me from ruin." The Duke's jaw tightened. "They have come to control what they do not own," he corrected. "Your destiny is not theirs to determine." "And yet what choice do I have?" Eleanor asked, genuine anguish in her voice. "I cannot defy them openly without confirming their worst suspicions. I cannot remain here without creating precisely the scandal we have discussed. I am trapped." For a moment, the Duke was silent, his expression that of a man engaged in rapid, complex calculation. Then, with sudden decision, he turned to Jenkins. "Show the visitors to the red drawing room. Inform them that Miss Whitcomb will join them shortly, accompanied by myself and Mrs. Winters." As the servant departed to fulfill this directive, the Duke crossed to the bell pull and gave it a sharp tug. Almost immediately, the housekeeper reappeared, her questioning gaze moving between her employer and Eleanor. "Mrs. Winters," the Duke said, his tone one of absolute authority, "I require your assistance in a matter of delicacy. Miss Whitcomb's relatives have arrived, convinced she has been compromised by her presence in this house. Your testimony as to the propriety of our meeting will be invaluable." The housekeeper's shrewd eyes assessed the situation with remarkable speed. "Of course, Your Grace. I have been present throughout, as is proper." A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Your loyalty is, as always, beyond price." He turned back to Eleanor, his expression softening as he extended his hand. "Shall we face your inquisitors together?" The gesture, so simple yet so profound in its implication of partnership, moved Eleanor deeply. She placed her hand in his, drawing strength from the warmth of his touch. "Together," she agreed. As they moved toward the door, Eleanor felt a curious sense of standing at a crossroads. Whatever transpired in the next hour would irrevocably alter the course of her life. The thought should have terrified her, yet all she felt was a strange, calm certainty that she was precisely where she needed to be. The Duke paused at the threshold, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "remember this. I am yours to command. Say the word, and I will send them away. Say another, and I will let them take you without protest. The choice, Eleanor, is entirely yours." In that moment, surrounded by luxury beyond her imagining, faced with a future both terrifying and exhilarating, Eleanor made her decision. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met his gaze with newfound resolve. "Let us hear what they have to say," she said, "and then let us decide our own fate." The Duke's answering smile held approval, admiration, and something deeper that sent warmth coursing through her veins. With a nod of acknowledgement, he led her from the room, Mrs. Winters following at a discreet distance. The confrontation that awaited might well determine her future, but for perhaps the first time in her life, Eleanor faced uncertainty without fear. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the dignity of one who had glimpsed possibilities beyond the narrow confines of the world she had always known. And that, she realized, was the Duke's greatest gift to her, greater than flowers or books or rings. He had shown her that she possessed the power to choose. The red drawing room lived up to its name. Crimson damask adorned the walls, curtains of matching hue framed tall windows, and even the carpet bore patterns of deep scarlet and burgundy. To Eleanor, entering with the Duke at her side, it seemed an apt setting for the confrontation to come, a battlefield dressed in silk and velvet. Her cousin James stood with his back to the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantelpiece in a pose of territorial authority. Beside him, Aunt Pembroke perched anxiously on the edge of a chair, her fingers working at her handkerchief, as though attempting to extract some hidden truth from its folds. The third member of their party, Reverend Stillwell, stood by the window, his austere figure silhouetted against the light, Bible clasped before him like a shield. "At last," James said, his tone dripping with righteous indignation. "I had begun to fear we would be required to summon the authorities." The Duke's hand tightened fractionally around Eleanor's before he released it, stepping forward with cool, aristocratic composure. "Mr. Hartford, I presume, you honor my home with your unexpected presence." "Honor?" James echoed, color rising in his thin cheeks. "I come to rescue my cousin from a situation of profound impropriety, sir. There is no honor in such necessity." "Rescue implies danger," the Duke observed. "I assure you, Miss Whitcomb has been in no danger whatsoever in my household." Mrs. Winters stepped forward, her starched presence radiating respectability. "I have been in attendance upon Miss Whitcomb throughout her visit, sir," she stated firmly, "as is proper for a young lady visiting a gentleman's residence." James's gaze flickered dismissively over the housekeeper before returning to the Duke. "The mere fact of her presence here unchaperoned—" "I am her chaperone," Mrs. Winters interrupted, drawing herself up to her full if modest height. "I have served the Ravenshire family for 30 years with unblemished character. My presence constitutes adequate propriety by any reasonable standard." Aunt Pembroke rose, her expression torn between hope and doubt. "Eleanor, child, are you quite well? We have been frantic with worry." "I am perfectly well, Aunt," Eleanor replied, striving for calm she did not entirely feel. "His Grace was kind enough to offer assistance when I found myself disoriented during my morning walk." "Disoriented," James repeated skeptically, a convenient explanation for being discovered in a gentleman's carriage. The Duke's expression hardened. "Are you questioning Miss Whitcomb's veracity, sir?" "I am questioning the wisdom of her actions," James retorted, "and the nature of your interest in a young woman whose position makes her particularly vulnerable to persuasion." Until now, Reverend Stillwell had remained silent, observing the exchange with the detached interest of one accustomed to witnessing human folly. Now he stepped forward, his lined face grave beneath iron-grey hair. "Your Grace," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of ecclesiastical authority, "I have known Eleanor since her christening. Her father was my dearest friend, a man of impeccable principle who raised his daughter to honor virtue above all else. Whatever the circumstances that have led to this unfortunate situation, I beg you as a gentleman to consider the damage your attention may inflict upon a young woman of modest means and irreproachable character." The appeal, delivered with sincere concern rather than accusation, seemed to affect the Duke more deeply than James's hostility. His expression softened fractionally. "I assure you, Reverend, my regard for Miss Whitcomb is founded precisely upon recognition of her exceptional character. I have no wish to cause her distress of any kind." "Then you will understand," the vicar continued, "why we must remove her from a situation that, whatever its actual innocence, must inevitably give rise to speculation harmful to her reputation." Eleanor felt control of the situation slipping away, her fate once again being determined by others, however well-intentioned. She stepped forward, drawing all eyes to her with sudden assertiveness. "I am present," she said, her voice steadier than she had expected, "and capable of speaking for myself." James frowned. "Eleanor, this is not the time for—" "It is precisely the time," she countered. "You have come here ostensibly concerned for my welfare, yet you discuss me as though I were a child or an imbecile, incapable of understanding my own circumstances." Aunt Pembroke gasped at this unprecedented display of defiance. "Eleanor, such disrespect to your cousin is regrettable but necessary," Eleanor finished. She turned to Reverend Stillwell, whose kindly face registered surprise rather than disapproval at her intervention. "Godfather, you knew my father well. Did he raise me to submit without question to the dictates of others, or to think for myself?" The vicar's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Your father valued independent thought, certainly, but he also understood the importance of guidance, particularly in matters where inexperience might lead to error. And you believe my association with the Duke constitutes such error?" "I believe," Reverend Stillwell replied carefully, "that appearances matter in this imperfect world. Whatever the true nature of your acquaintance with His Grace, society will form its own conclusions, rarely charitable ones, I fear." "Then society stands corrected," the Duke interjected, moving to stand beside Eleanor in a gesture of unmistakable solidarity, "for I have asked Miss Whitcomb to do me the honor of becoming my wife." The silence that followed this declaration was absolute. James's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. Aunt Pembroke sank back into her chair with a small cry of astonishment. Only Reverend Stillwell maintained his composure, his shrewd eyes moving thoughtfully between the Duke and Eleanor. "This is unexpected," the vicar said at length. "Is it?" the Duke challenged. "Is it so incomprehensible that a man might recognize exceptional worth regardless of fortune or connection?" James recovered his voice at last. "You expect us to believe that you, one of the wealthiest peers in England, have developed a sincere attachment to my cousin, after what, 2 meetings? "I do not require your belief," the Duke replied coldly. "Merely your acknowledgement of Miss Whitcomb's right to determine her own future." All eyes turned to Eleanor, who stood caught between elation and uncertainty. The Duke's announcement had changed everything, yet nothing was truly resolved. His proposal remained conditional upon her acceptance, a fact known only to them. "Eleanor," Aunt Pembroke ventured, her voice tremulous with suppressed excitement, "is this true? Has His Grace actually offered for you?" Before she could respond, the drawing-room door opened to admit Jenkins. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion," the butler said with a bow, "but Lady Beatrice Hensley has arrived and insists upon seeing you on a matter she describes as vital to the preservation of moral decency." The Duke's expression darkened. "Lady Beatrice's concern for moral decency is both novel and suspect," he observed. "However, since we appear to be hosting an impromptu tribunal, we might as well admit all interested parties. Show her in, Jenkins." Eleanor felt her heart sink. Lady Beatrice's appearance could only herald further complication, perhaps even orchestrated humiliation. She glanced at the Duke, finding in his steady gaze a reassurance that steadied her. Moments later, Lady Beatrice swept into the room, her golden curls arranged in artful disarray, her face a study in manufactured concern. Behind her followed Miss Bentham, notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice began, then feigned surprise at the assembled company. "Oh, I had no idea you were entertaining. How eclectic a gathering." Her gaze lingered on Eleanor with poisonous satisfaction before returning to the Duke. "I came the moment I heard the dreadful rumors. Miss Whitcomb seen entering your carriage unaccompanied. Your household in disarray receiving her without proper introduction. I felt it my moral duty to intervene before irreparable damage was done to her already precarious reputation." "How extraordinarily considerate," the Duke replied, his tone suggesting quite the opposite. "Your concern for Miss Whitcomb's welfare does you credit. particularly given your previous interactions with her. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened. One need not admire a person to wish them protected from their own poor indiscretions. Indeed, the Duke agreed. Just as one need not respect a person to treat them with basic courtesy, a principle you might consider adopting, Lady Beatrice. Colour mottled her perfect complexion. I do not come here to be insulted. No, the Duke interrupted. You come here to insult. There is a distinction, though perhaps too subtle for your discernment. James cleared his throat. While I appreciate your Grace's defence of my cousin's honour, the fact remains that her presence here alone— She is not alone, the Duke pointed out. She is surrounded by more chaperones than a debutante at her first ball. And as I was explaining before Lady Beatrice's illuminating arrival, Miss Whitcomb is here as my future Duchess, should she do me the honour of accepting my proposal. Lady Beatrice's fan clattered to the floor. Your Duchess, she repeated, her voice rising to a near squeak. Surely you jest. I assure you I do not, the Duke replied. Miss Whitcomb possesses every quality I value. Intelligence, character, genuine kindness, all traits notably absent in certain quarters of society. The barb struck home. Lady Beatrice's face contorted with naked envy before she mastered herself. How unexpected, she managed, echoing Reverend Stillwell's earlier assessment. One wonders what precipitated such an unconventional choice. Love, the Duke said simply. The word hung in the air, resonant and transformative. Eleanor felt its impact like a physical touch, warming her from within. He had not spoken of love before, only admiration, respect, recognition. This new declaration, made before witnesses with such unaffected directness, rendered her momentarily speechless. Reverend Stillwell studied the Duke with newfound interest. A commendable sentiment, he observed, though one often claimed in haste and repented at leisure. I'm not given to hasty decisions, Reverend, the Duke replied, nor to repentance for actions taken in accordance with my deepest convictions. The vicar nodded slowly. Then perhaps we might allow Miss Whitcomb a moment to express her own feelings on the matter. After all, even the most advantageous proposal requires the lady's consent. All attention returned to Eleanor, standing at the centre of a drama she had neither sought nor anticipated. The pearl at her throat seemed suddenly heavy, a tangible reminder of all that had shaped her life until this moment. Her father's austere love, her mother's gentle memory, years of quiet dignity in the face of diminished circumstances. She began, then faltered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision before her. The Duke's eyes held hers, patient and unwavering, asking everything yet demanding nothing. A clock on the mantelpiece chimed the hour, the sound breaking the tense silence. Eleanor drew a deep breath, aware that her next words would irrevocably alter her future, and his. I am deeply sensible of the honour your Grace does me, she said at last, her voice gaining strength with each word, but I cannot in good conscience accept your proposal without— The door burst open once more, cutting off her response. A man Eleanor had never seen before stood on the threshold, his face flushed with exertion, a document clutched in his hand. Your Grace, he gasped. Forgive the intrusion, but the matter could not wait. I found it, the proof you sought regarding the Whitcomb estate. The newcomer's dramatic entrance silenced the room. He was a slight man, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that magnified eyes sharp with intelligence. His unremarkable appearance contrasted with the palpable authority of his interruption. Hargrove, the Duke acknowledged, betraying no surprise at this timely arrival. You have news? The man, evidently the Duke's solicitor, nodded vigorously. Most illuminating news, your Grace. His gaze settled briefly on Eleanor, curiosity mingling with what might have been sympathy. Regarding the late Reverend Whitcomb's affairs, Eleanor felt a curious lightness in her limbs. Her father's affairs, what could this stranger possibly know that she did not? James stepped forward, his expression guarded. I fail to see what business my uncle's estate could be of his Grace's, he said stiffly. The matter is a private family concern. Ordinarily, I would agree, Hargrove replied, unruffled by James's hostility. However, when fraudulent claims are made against a clergyman's estate, rendering his daughter destitute, it becomes a matter of justice, in which his Grace takes particular interest. Fraudulent, Eleanor echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? The solicitor held up the document in his hand. I have here the original mortgage agreement for the Northshire Vicarage, dated 1852. It bears the signatures of the late Reverend Whitcomb and the church commissioners. He extracted a second paper from his leather case, and here the supposed amendment increasing the principal by nearly £3,000, dated 1868. Reverend Stillwell moved closer, professional interest overcoming his reservations. May I? Hargrove handed him both documents. The vicar examined them with practiced attention, his brow furrowing deeper with each moment. "The second document is a forgery," he declared at length. "A skillful one, but a forgery nonetheless. The signature, purporting to be Charles Whitcomb's, shows subtle differences from his genuine hand." He glanced at Eleanor. "I received enough letters from your father to know his writing intimately." "But who would—" Eleanor began, then stopped as realization dawned. She turned to her cousin, whose face had drained of color. "James, what have you done?" "I've done nothing," he protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is absurd, a fabrication designed to discredit me and what of this?" Hargrove interrupted, producing yet another document, a receipt for £3,000 withdrawn from the church treasury by you, Mr. Hartford, as acting executor of your uncle's estate. Money that never appeared in any official accounting. James's composure cracked entirely. "You have no right to investigate my private affairs. This is persecution. This," the Duke said coldly, "is justice. Your cousin has lived in reduced circumstances, dependent upon charity, while you systematically plundered what remained of her inheritance." "I was owed," James burst out, abandoning pretense. "Do you know what it cost to maintain that self-righteous man in his final illness? The debts he accumulated with his charitable excesses? Someone had to pay. And so, you decided that someone should be his daughter," the Duke observed, contempt evident in every syllable. "How admirably familial of you." Aunt Pembroke had risen, her face ashen with shock. "James, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from Eleanor." "I steal? I took what was rightfully mine." James's face contorted with the ugly truth he could no longer conceal. "Uncle Charles received a larger portion of grandfather's estate because of his holy calling. My father received a pittance in comparison. I merely rectified an old injustice." Eleanor felt oddly calm as the foundation of her life, her understanding of her circumstances, shifted beneath her. "So there are no debts? The cottage, my home, it isn't to be sold?" "It should not be," Hargrove confirmed. "Once these documents are presented to the church commissioners, the false claims against your father's estate will be invalidated. The property and its contents rightfully belong to you." Lady Beatrice, who had observed this revelation with ill-concealed fascination, gave a light, brittle laugh. How perfectly theatrical. Miss Whitcomb transformed from pauper to property owner in an instant. One might almost suspect the timing to be arranged. "One might," the Duke agreed pleasantly, "if one possessed a particularly suspicious mind and limited intelligence. Fortunately, the church commissioners possess neither handicap and will recognize justice when presented with evidence." Reverend Stillwell had moved to stand beside Eleanor, his weathered face grave with righteous anger. "James Hartford, you have committed a sin against your family and against God. Your uncle trusted you to execute his estate with honor, that you would betray that trust. Spare me the sermon," James snapped, desperation making him reckless. "What will you do? Have me arrested? Create a public scandal that would taint Eleanor as surely as myself? The niece of a thief is hardly suitable material for a duchess." "On the contrary," the Duke replied, his voice dangerously soft. "Miss Whitcomb's dignity in the face of betrayal only confirms what I already knew of her character. As for scandal, I believe we might arrange a more discreet resolution." He turned to Hargrove. "You have prepared the alternative document I requested?" The solicitor nodded, extracting a final paper from his case. "As instructed, Your Grace." The Duke accepted it with a nod of approval before addressing James. "This document acknowledges your discovery of an accounting error in your uncle's estate. It returns all misappropriated funds to Miss Whitcomb, with interest, and renounces any further claim upon the vicarage property. Sign it, and this matter ends here." "And if I refuse?" James challenged, though his bravado was visibly crumbling. "Then Mr. Hargrove delivers his evidence to the magistrate," the Duke replied simply. "Your reputation, your freedom, and your future prospects would all be forfeit. I leave the choice to you." For a long moment, James seemed to waver between defiance and self-preservation. Then, with a muttered imprecation, he snatched the document and the pen Hargrove offered. "You'll regret this," he hissed, scrawling his signature with bitter force. "Both of you. I doubt that exceedingly," the Duke remarked. He turned to Aunt Pembroke, whose shock had given way to quiet tears. "Mrs. Pembroke, I believe you were unaware of your brother's actions." "Entirely," she whispered. "Eleanor, child, had I known—" "You couldn't have known," Eleanor assured her, moved by her aunt's genuine distress. "James deceived us both." Lady Beatrice, sensing that the drama had taken a direction unfavorable to her interests, snapped her fan open with irritated precision. "Well, this has been most educational, but I believe I have intruded upon a family matter for quite long enough." "Indeed you have." the Duke agreed cordially. "Jenkins will show you out." The butler materialized as if summoned by thought alone, holding the door with pointed courtesy. Lady Beatrice hesitated, clearly unwilling to depart before witnessing the resolution of Eleanor's response to the Duke's proposal. "I should hate to leave without offering Miss Whitcomb my congratulations," she said, the word dripping with insincere sweetness. "How thoughtful," the Duke replied, "but perhaps premature." "Miss Whitcomb has not yet given her answer, and will not do so with such an audience," Eleanor added, finding unexpected courage in the revelation of her altered circumstances. "Some matters, Lady Beatrice, remain private, even in a society that feeds on spectacle." Lady Beatrice's perfect features tightened with displeasure. With a final venomous glance at Eleanor, she swept from the room, her faithful Miss Bentham trailing in her wake. James stood clutching the signed document, his face a mask of thwarted rage and humiliation. "I suppose you expect me to crawl away in disgrace," he spat. "I expect nothing from you," Eleanor replied quietly, "except perhaps that you honor this agreement, as you did not honor my father's trust." "Your cottage and possessions will be secured immediately," Hargrove added, with professional detachment. "I shall personally oversee the transfer of funds to Miss Whitcomb's account." Reverend Stillwell laid a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Your father would be proud of the dignity with which you have faced this trial, my dear, though I confess I am curious about your response to another matter of significance." He glanced meaningfully at the Duke, who stood with uncharacteristic uncertainty, awaiting Eleanor's verdict on a question far more personal than property rights. "I believe," Eleanor said carefully, "that decision requires private reflection, and perhaps a conversation with His Grace that is not conducted before an audience." The vicar smiled, something like approval warming his austere features. "Wisdom indeed. Mrs. Pembroke, Mr. Hartford, I believe our presence is no longer required nor, I suspect, desired." Aunt Pembroke rose, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. "Of course. Eleanor, shall I wait for you at home?" The simple question contained worlds of implication. Would Eleanor return to her aunt's house, or had her circumstances, her choices, irrevocably altered? "I shall call upon you this afternoon, Aunt," Eleanor promised. "There is much we must discuss." James, still clutching the document that testified to his disgrace, made no farewell. He stalked from the room with the rigid posture of a man barely containing his fury. Aunt Pembroke followed with an apologetic glance at Eleanor. Reverend Stillwell bowed to the Duke, then took Eleanor's hand. "Follow your heart," he advised softly, "but guard it with your head. Your father would expect no less." With these cryptic words, he too departed, leaving Eleanor alone with the Duke and his solicitor. Hargrove busied himself gathering his papers, his manner suggesting he was attempting to fade into invisibility. "That will be all, Hargrove," the Duke said. "You have my profound gratitude for your timely intervention." The solicitor bowed. "Always a pleasure to serve justice, Your Grace." "Miss Whitcomb." With that, he too was gone. The door closed with a quiet click, leaving Eleanor and the Duke in a silence charged with unspoken possibility. The red drawing room, so recently filled with conflict and revelation, seemed suddenly vast and intimate at once. "Well," the Duke said at length, "that was not precisely how I envisioned this morning unfolding." The unexpected touch of humor in his voice broke the tension. Eleanor felt laughter bubbling up from some deep, relieved place within her. "Nor I," she admitted, "though I confess the revelation about my father's estate was providential." "Providence had some assistance," he acknowledged. "When you mentioned your cousin's letter yesterday, I suspected impropriety. Hargrove is remarkably efficient when motivated by righteous indignation." "You set this in motion after our meeting in the park?" Eleanor asked, astonished at the swiftness with which he had acted on her behalf. "I set it in motion the moment I saw genuine distress in your eyes," he corrected gently. "The timing of Hargrove's discovery was fortuitous, but the investigation would have proceeded regardless." Eleanor moved to the window, needing space to absorb the magnitude of what had transpired. The square beyond the glass lay peaceful in winter sunlight, unaware of the emotional tempest that had raged within these walls. "You asked me a question," she said at last, her back still turned to him. "Before all of this." "I did." His voice came closer, though he did not touch her. "And now I fear the circumstances have rendered it impossible for you to answer freely." She turned to face him, finding him nearer than she had expected, close enough that she could see the subtle variations of blue in his remarkable eyes. "You fear I might accept out of gratitude." "The thought had occurred," he admitted, his voice dropping to an intimate register that sent a shiver through her. "Gratitude is a poor foundation for marriage." "As is pity," she reminded him. "Yet you proposed when you believed me destitute." "I proposed because I could not bear the thought of losing you." he said simply. Your circumstances were irrelevant to my heart, if not to my timing. And now? She asked. Now that I am revealed to be a woman of modest but independent means, does your offer stand? In answer, he reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew the wooden box she had seen earlier. Opening it, he revealed once more the sapphire ring, glowing like a captured star against its velvet nest. My offer stands, he said, not out of duty or impulse or pity, but because in you I have found what I had ceased to believe existed, a woman of genuine worth, whose spirit calls to mine across all the artificial barriers society constructs between us. He did not kneel, a duke knelt only to his sovereign, but his expression as he held the ring between them contained more genuine humility than Eleanor had ever witnessed in his proud face. Eleanor Whitcomb, he said, her name like a caress upon his lips, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, not for what I can give you, nor for what you might escape, but for what we might build together? The moment stretched, crystalline and perfect. Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw not the Duke of Ravenshire, most eligible bachelor in England, but Arthur, the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she was discounted, who had fought for her when she could not fight for herself. The answer, she realized, had been formed in her heart long before the question was properly asked. Yes, she said simply, I will. The ring slipped onto her finger as though fashioned for her hand alone, the sapphire catching the light with each quickened beat of her heart. Arthur, for he was truly Arthur to her now, lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers just above the glittering band. I believe, he said, his voice rough with emotion, that I have waited all my life for this moment, without knowing what I waited for. As have I, Eleanor confessed. Though I had ceased to believe such moments existed outside of novels, his smile transformed his face, erasing the last vestiges of aristocratic reserve. Life, my dearest Eleanor, occasionally surpasses even the most ambitious fiction. And as he drew her gently into his arms, the future unfurling before them like a path illuminated by newfound hope, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of her life was just beginning. 1 week later, Eleanor stood before the mirror in her new bedchamber, scarcely recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was the modest blue walking dress, replaced by a morning gown of lavender silk that whispered against her skin with each breath. Her hair, arranged by the Duchess of Ravenshire's personal lady's maid, framed her face in soft waves rather than the severe chignon she had worn for so long. Most startling of all was the sapphire ring that caught the light as she raised her hand to touch the pearl at her throat, the only element of her former life that remained unchanged. It suits you, came a voice from the doorway. All of it. Eleanor turned to find Arthur watching her, his tall figure leaning against the doorframe with casual elegance that belied the intensity of his gaze. I feel rather like an imposter, she admitted, as though I've stepped into someone else's life. Not someone else's, he corrected, crossing to stand behind her, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. Your own, simply a chapter you never anticipated. Their reflected images stood in striking contrast. He in his impeccable morning attire, every inch the aristocrat, she in her new finery, still bearing the slight awkwardness of one unaccustomed to such luxury. Yet there was rightness in the tableau they created, a harmony that transcended appearance. The announcement has been sent to the Times, Arthur said. By tomorrow morning all of London will know that the Duke of Ravenshire is to wed Miss Eleanor Whitcomb in the spring. And Lady Beatrice will choke on her breakfast, Eleanor added with a smile that held more mischief than malice. Arthur laughed, the sound warming the elegant chamber. A delightful subsidiary benefit, though I confess her discomfiture is of far less interest to me than your happiness. His expression grew more serious. Are you happy, Eleanor? Truly. She turned to face him, studying the beloved features that had become so dear in such a remarkably short time. I am, she said simply, though I still marvel at the speed with which my life has transformed. A fortnight ago I stood invisible at the edge of a ballroom. Today I am the talk of London society, for better or worse. For better, Arthur insisted, though I know the transition cannot be easy. Society can be cruel to those it perceives as outsiders. Eleanor's fingers traced the edge of her pearl pendant, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. I have faced society's cruelty before, though from a very different position. At least now I face it with you beside me. Always, he promised, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips, a gesture that had become habitual between them, yet lost none of its power to quicken her pulse. A discreet knock interrupted the moment. Jenkins appeared at the threshold, his dignified bearing unruffled as always, though Eleanor fancied she detected a glimmer of approval in his eyes when they fell upon her. Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb, he announced, Lady Merivale has called and awaits you in the blue drawing-room. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Lady Merivale? How unexpected. Did she indicate the purpose of her visit? She mentioned only that it was a matter of some delicacy, sir, concerning the upcoming ball. Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. Lady Merivale, in whose home she had first danced with Arthur, had been among the most prominent hostesses of the season. Her approval or disapproval could significantly influence Eleanor's reception by society. We shall attend her directly, Arthur decided. Thank you, Jenkins. As the butler withdrew, Eleanor smoothed her skirts with nervous hands. I wonder what she wants. There is only one way to discover, Arthur replied, offering his arm with a reassuring smile. Shall we? The journey through the mansion that would soon be her home still felt like navigation through a foreign land. Corridors lined with ancestral portraits, rooms appointed with treasures accumulated over centuries, all of it spoke of a heritage so far removed from her modest upbringing that Eleanor sometimes felt she had stumbled into a dream. Lady Merivale rose as they entered the blue drawing-room, her elegant figure swathed in a visiting dress of emerald green that emphasized her still handsome features. At 50, she retained both beauty and formidable social authority. Your Grace, she greeted Arthur with a curtsy. Miss Whitcomb, how kind of you to receive me without notice. The pleasure is ours, Arthur replied with formal correctness. Please, be seated. May we offer refreshment? Nothing, thank you. Lady Merivale declined, resuming her seat with regal precision. I shall come directly to the point. Your engagement has created quite the sensation, as you must be aware. Eleanor tensed, anticipating censure disguised as concern. Arthur's hand covered hers briefly, a silent gesture of support. Indeed, he acknowledged, though sensations in my experience are fleeting, society will soon find new subjects for speculation. Perhaps, Lady Merivale conceded, but in the interim Miss Whitcomb faces a significant challenge. Her first appearance as your affianced bride will set the tone for her reception by the ton. She turned her attention fully to Eleanor, her shrewd eyes assessing. You are, my dear, about to undergo a trial by fire. There will be those who welcome you genuinely, and those who smile while sharpening their knives. I am not unfamiliar with the latter, Eleanor replied with quiet dignity, though previously they did not trouble to smile first. Lady Merivale's lips curved in genuine amusement. Well said. It is precisely that composure which will serve you best in the weeks ahead. She leaned forward slightly. I have come to offer my assistance. Of all the possible motivations for this visit, this was perhaps the least expected. Eleanor exchanged a surprised glance with Arthur. That is most kind, she managed. It is not entirely altruistic, Lady Merivale admitted candidly. I confess to a certain satisfaction in championing an unconventional choice, particularly when that choice has clearly been made from genuine affection rather than calculation. She fixed Arthur with a penetrating stare. I have watched you navigate 3 seasons with admirable detachment, Your Grace. That you should finally surrender your heart to the one young woman who neither sought nor expected your attention suggests a refreshing triumph of substance over form. Arthur inclined his head, acknowledging the compliment with characteristic grace. Miss Whitcomb's worth lies precisely in her indifference to the superficial values that govern too much of society. Indeed, Lady Merivale turned back to Eleanor. Which brings me to my proposal. The Duchess of Hartswood holds her annual winter ball next week. As your first public appearance following the announcement, it will be decisive. I suggest you arrive under my personal sponsorship. The significance of this offer was not lost on Eleanor. Lady Merivale's approval would signal to society that Eleanor was to be accepted, regardless of her origins. I am deeply honored, she said sincerely, though I confess some confusion as to why you would extend such kindness to one who has done nothing to earn it. Lady Merivale's expression softened fractionally. Perhaps I see something of myself in you, Miss Whitcomb. I too married above my expected station, though the gap was less dramatic than in your case. The early days were challenging. A friendly hand would have been welcome. This revelation, that the formidable Lady Merivale had once stood where Eleanor now stood, was deeply moving. Then I accept your offer with profound gratitude, Eleanor said warmly. Excellent. Lady Merivale's tone became briskly practical. Now, as to your gown for the occasion, I have taken the liberty, Arthur interrupted, of arranging an appointment with Madame Delacroix for this afternoon. I believe she is considered the première modiste in London. Lady Merivale's eyebrows rose in approval. Indeed, her waiting list is typically months long. You must have been very persuasive, Your Grace. I merely explained the situation, Arthur replied with a smile that suggested his explanation had been accompanied by extraordinary generosity. Madame was most accommodating. I'm certain she was. Lady Merivale rose, signalling the end of her visit. Very well. With suitable attire and proper introduction, we shall present Miss Whitcomb to society in a manner that brooks no opposition. She fixed Eleanor with an assessing gaze. Though your greatest asset, my dear, will be your own composure. Remember that you enter that ballroom as the future Duchess of Ravenshire. Carry yourself accordingly. After Lady Merivale's departure, Eleanor sank onto a settee, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the tactical approach to what she had naively imagined would be a simple announcement. Is it always so strategic? She asked. This world of society and status? Arthur seated himself beside her, his expression rueful. I fear so. It is one of the many reasons I avoided entanglement for so long. The artifice grows wearisome. And yet, here we are, Eleanor observed, glancing at her ring. Preparing for battle, it seems. Not battle, Arthur corrected gently. Merely a dance of a different kind than the one that began our acquaintance. And like that night, we shall face it together. The week that followed passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Eleanor's days were filled with fittings, etiquette refreshers, and introductions to Arthur's extended family, most of whom received her with cordial curiosity, if not the unreserved warmth she might have hoped for. Evenings were quieter, spent in the library where Arthur read aloud from his favorite volumes, while Eleanor worked on correspondence, replying to the flood of congratulatory notes that arrived daily, some sincere, others transparently motivated by the writer's desire to align themselves with the future Duchess. Throughout it all, Arthur remained her anchor, his steadfast support never wavering, despite the occasional raised eyebrow or whispered comment that reached them. If society questioned his choice, he gave no indication of noticing, let alone caring. The night of the Duchess of Hartswood's ball arrived with surprising swiftness. Eleanor stood in her chamber, scarcely breathing as her lady's maid made final adjustments to her gown, a creation of midnight blue silk, embellished with silver embroidery that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style that framed her face with soft curls, and at her throat, her mother's pearl had been reset as the centerpiece of a delicate silver necklace, Arthur's gift, combining her past with her future. You look, he said from the doorway, his voice hushed with admiration, absolutely transcendent. Eleanor turned, a smile blooming at the sight of him in formal evening attire, the stark black and white emphasizing the powerful lines of his figure, the blue of his eyes intensified by the sapphire pin in his cravat that matched her ring. And you, she replied softly. Look every inch the Duke. A poor accomplishment, he said, moving to take her hands in his, compared to looking like the man who loves you. The simple declaration, the first time he had spoken the word so directly, sent warmth cascading through her. Arthur, she began, only to find words inadequate to express the tide of emotion rising within her. He understood without explanation, as he so often did. I know, he murmured, raising her hand to his lips. I have known since the moment you stepped into that carriage, trusting me, despite every reason for caution. A discreet cough from the maid reminded them of her presence. With reluctance they separated, though Arthur's gaze promised that the conversation was merely postponed, not concluded. Lady Merivale's carriage awaits, he said. She is most punctual. Then we should not keep her waiting, Eleanor replied, gathering her composure along with the silver-embroidered wrap that completed her ensemble. As they descended the grand staircase, Eleanor felt a curious sense of déjà vu, as though she were simultaneously the woman she had been on the night of Lady Merivale's ball and the woman she was becoming. The parallel was both dizzying and reassuring, a reminder of how far she had come in so short a time. Lady Merivale awaited them in the entrance hall, resplendent in silver tissue over violet silk. Her approving nod as she surveyed Eleanor's appearance was more gratifying than effusive praise might have been. You'll do, she pronounced. Now remember what we discussed. Enter with confidence. Acknowledge greetings with warm dignity. Dance only with those of impeccable standing, at least for this first appearance. I shall endeavor to follow your counsel, Eleanor promised, exchanging an amused glance with Arthur. His eyes reflected her own recognition of the irony, that she who had once been invisible at the periphery of such gatherings now required strategy for navigating them from a position of prominence. The journey to Hartswood House passed swiftly, filled with Lady Merivale's final instructions and observations. As their carriage joined the queue of elegant vehicles disgorging passengers at the entrance, Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves. Remember, Arthur murmured, his hand covering hers, you have faced far worse than a ballroom full of curious onlookers, and this time you do not face it alone. His words steadied her. By the time they reached the entrance, where the Duchess of Hartswood herself waited to greet her most distinguished guests, Eleanor had found her center of calm. "Your Grace," the Duchess greeted Arthur with practiced charm. "How delightful that you could join us." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, assessment masked by social smile. "And Miss Whitcomb, my congratulations on your engagement. London speaks of little else." "You are most kind, Your Grace," Eleanor replied with a curtsy that acknowledged the Duchess's rank while maintaining her own dignity. "It is an honor to attend your renowned gathering." Something like approval flickered in the Duchess's eyes. "Lady Merivale has spoken highly of you," she said, with a nod to their sponsor. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted." They moved past the receiving line into the ballroom proper, a vast, glittering space already filled with the cream of society. The orchestra played a lively country dance, couples moving through the intricate patterns with practiced grace. Conversation faltered as their entrance was noted. Heads turned, fans fluttered, lorgnettes were raised for better inspection of the woman who had captured the Duke of Ravensshire. Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of assessing gazes, some curious, others envious, a few openly hostile. Across the room, Lady Beatrice stood with her usual court of admirers. Her face, when she caught sight of Eleanor on Arthur's arm, froze in a rictus of thwarted ambition thinly veiled as polite acknowledgement. "Shall we circulate?" Arthur suggested, seemingly oblivious to the sensation their appearance had created. "There are several people I should like you to meet." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Eleanor found herself presented to dowager duchesses whose approval could make or break a reputation, to politicians whose influence extended from parliament to drawing rooms, to young matrons whose friendship might ease her transition into her new role. Through it all, she maintained the quiet dignity that had carried her through years of reduced circumstances. Neither fawning nor defensive, she met each introduction with genuine interest and appropriate deference, her natural grace serving her better than any coached behavior might have done. "You are a natural," Lady Merivale observed, during a brief moment of respite. "One would think you had been born to this." "Hardly," Eleanor demurred, "but I have had excellent teachers in both humility and pride." The orchestra struck up a waltz, the first of the evening. Arthur, who had been engaged in conversation with an elderly earl, appeared at her side as though summoned by the music. "Miss Whitcomb," he said formally, though his eyes danced with private meaning, "would you honor me with this dance?" As Eleanor placed her hand in his, she became aware that the crowd had drawn back slightly, creating a space around them. The parallel to their first dance was unmistakable, but this time the watching eyes held not shock but anticipation, as if the ton had collectively decided to reserve judgment until this moment. Arthur led her to the center of the floor with the confidence of one who had navigated these waters all his life. As his hand settled at her waist, he leaned close enough to murmur, "Let them watch." The words, an echo of that first transformative night, sent a ripple of joy through Eleanor. As the music swelled and they began to move together, she felt the last of her apprehension dissolve. Here in the circle of his arms, with his gaze holding hers as though she were the only woman in the room, she found perfect certainty. They danced in flawless harmony, their movements so attuned that it seemed they had waltzed together 1,000 times before. The watching crowd receded from Eleanor's awareness until there was only Arthur, only the music, only the magical suspension of reality that came with perfect partnership. When the music ended, applause rippled through the ballroom, warmer and more enthusiastic than mere politeness required. Eleanor curtsied, Arthur bowed, and as they straightened, she saw something in the watching faces that she had not expected. Approval. Not universal, certainly. Lady Beatrice's tight smile and Miss Bentham's theatrical sigh made their dissent clear. But among the majority, there seemed a collective recognition that whatever had drawn the Duke of Ravensshire to this unconventional choice, it possessed a validity that transcended social calculation. "I believe," Arthur said quietly, as he led her from the floor, "we have won the first skirmish." "Was it a battle, then?" Eleanor asked, though she understood perfectly what he meant. "Of a sort," he acknowledged, "though the victor was determined before we ever entered the field." His gaze swept the room, taking in the subtle shifts in attitude, the whispered assessments, the respectful nods now directed toward Eleanor. "They see it now, what I saw that first night." "And what was that?" she asked, genuinely curious. His answer was interrupted by the approach of a distinguished couple, the Earl and Countess of Wexford, Lady Beatrice's parents. Eleanor steeled herself for condescension or worse, thinly veiled insult. "Your Grace," the Earl greeted Arthur with a bow. "Miss Whitcomb, may I offer our sincere congratulations on your engagement?" The Countess, a statuesque woman whose beauty had hardened with age into imperious elegance, assessed Eleanor with shrewd eyes. "Indeed, our daughter spoke often of your unexpected connection. I confess I was skeptical. Having observed you this evening, I find my skepticism unfounded." Coming from the mother of her most ardent detractor, this qualified approval was astonishing. Eleanor inclined her head, masking her surprise with practiced composure. "You are most kind, Lady Wexford." "Not kind," the Countess corrected, "merely observant. You carry yourself with dignity, Miss Whitcomb. It is a quality sadly lacking in many young women of far greater advantage." The unspoken comparison to her own daughter hung in the air between them. With a final nod that managed to convey both approval and dismissal, the Wexfords moved on, leaving Eleanor momentarily speechless. "Well," Arthur said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "if you have won over the Countess of Wexford, all else should prove simple by comparison." Eleanor shook her head in amazement. "I feel rather as though I've passed some arcane test I didn't know I was taking." "That," Arthur replied, "is an apt description of society at its most fundamental level. Arbitrary examinations with unspoken rules, judged by those who established the system to exclude precisely such interlopers as yourself." "And yet here I stand," Eleanor observed, apparently having earned at least provisional acceptance. "Not provisional," he corrected gently. "You have conquered them, my dear, and in doing so rendered me prouder than I can express." The remainder of the evening unfolded like a dream, a succession of dances, conversations, and introductions that blurred together in a tapestry of newfound belonging. Where once Eleanor had observed from the periphery, now she stood at the center, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of Arthur's arm as he guided her through the intricacies of her new world. By the time their carriage rolled away from Hartswood House, the first pale hints of dawn were breaking over London's rooftops. Eleanor leaned back against the plush upholstery, fatigue and elation mingling in equal measure. "You were magnificent," Arthur said softly, taking her gloved hand in his. "Every eye in that ballroom recognized your worth tonight." "They recognized your choice," Eleanor corrected. "The approval was for your judgment, not my merit." "I disagree," he replied firmly. "They may have looked initially because of me, but they continued looking because of you. Your grace, your dignity, your genuine warmth, these qualities shine independently of any title or connection." Eleanor smiled, too weary to argue yet warmed by his unwavering belief in her. As the carriage drew up before the Ravenshire townhouse, she felt a curious sense of homecoming. This mansion that had seemed so imposing just weeks before now represented sanctuary and belonging. Jenkins awaited them, as impeccable at dawn as he had been at dusk. "Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb," he greeted them with a bow. "I trust the evening was satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Jenkins," Arthur replied, assisting Eleanor from the carriage with careful attention to her fatigue. "I believe we may consider Miss Whitcomb's debut as my affianced bride an unqualified success." "Most gratifying, sir," the butler responded, his dignity unbending, even as something like approval flickered in his eyes when they rested on Eleanor. "Breakfast will be served whenever you wish it." "Not before noon, I suspect," Arthur said with a smile. "It has been a rather expansive evening." Eleanor suppressed a yawn as they entered the grand foyer. "I fear I shall sleep until midday at the earliest." "Then sleep you shall," Arthur declared. "You have more than earned your rest." He escorted her to the foot of the staircase that led to her chambers, pausing there with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Eleanor," he began, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur that sent a shiver of awareness through her, despite her fatigue. "Yes?" she prompted when he fell silent. "I wish to say, that is, I hope to express—" He stopped, seeming to gather himself. "Forgive me. Even after years of parliamentary debate and diplomatic negotiations, I find myself unaccountably tongue-tied when it matters most." Eleanor felt a rush of tenderness for this powerful man, suddenly rendered vulnerable by emotion. "Perhaps," she suggested gently, "some things need not be expressed in words." His eyes darkened at her meaning. With deliberate care, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm rather than the back, an intimacy that would have scandalized Lady Merivale had she witnessed it. "Until tomorrow, then," he murmured against her skin. "Until tomorrow," Eleanor agreed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand and ascending the staircase. At the landing, she glanced back to find him watching her still, his expression a complex mingling of desire and reverence that left her breathless despite the distance between them. The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity, preparations for the wedding, set for early spring when the gardens at Ravenshire Abbey would be at their most beautiful, consumed much of Eleanor's time. Guest lists were drafted and revised, menus planned, and endless fittings for her trousseau endured with patience, born of the knowledge that each task brought her closer to her new life. Arthur had insisted she spare no expense, placing accounts at London's finest establishments at her disposal. Eleanor, still unaccustomed to such largesse, exercised restraint that both amused and touched him. "You are to be a duchess," he reminded her one evening as they sat together in the library reviewing the latest lists from the wedding planner. "You needn't count pennies as though preparing to manage a vicar's household." "Old habits," Eleanor replied with a rueful smile. "Besides, extravagance has never appealed to me. I prefer quality to quantity, substance to show." "Which is precisely why you shall make an exemplary duchess," he observed, setting aside the papers to focus fully on her. "The title carries responsibilities beyond the ornamental: charitable endeavors, patronage of the arts, management of extensive estates. All these fall within your purview." "I confess, the scope of it all sometimes overwhelms me," Eleanor admitted. "When I think of the lives that will be affected by decisions we make, tenant farmers, village schools, local industries, I feel woefully unprepared." Arthur reached across the space between them to take her hand. "You underestimate yourself as always. Your intelligence, your compassion, your fundamental understanding of human dignity, these qualities will guide you far better than the shallow social training that produces most aristocratic wives." His faith in her was a constant source of wonder to Eleanor, even as she navigated the sometimes treacherous waters of London society, where acceptance remained variable despite the Countess of Wexford's surprising endorsement. Arthur's unwavering support provided an anchor against doubt. Not all experiences were challenging, however. Eleanor found unexpected pleasure in certain aspects of her new position, particularly the opportunity to effect meaningful change through strategic philanthropy. With Arthur's encouragement, she had begun exploring improvements for the schools on his estates, researching progressive educational methods that might offer children of all classes greater opportunity. "You see," he said when she shared her ideas with characteristic enthusiasm, "already you think like a duchess, not of privilege but of responsibility." As winter yielded gradually to early spring, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to thoughts of Ravenshire Abbey, the ancestral seat she had yet to visit, but which would soon become her primary home. Arthur spoke of it with rare animation, describing ancient stone walls warmed by centuries of history, gardens that tumbled down to a river valley, and libraries filled with treasures accumulated by generations of his family. "When shall we go?" she asked one evening, as they sat by the fire in the blue drawing-room where their extraordinary journey had truly begun. "To the Abbey, I mean. I should like to see it before everything changes." Arthur's expression softened with understanding. "Next week, if you wish it. The daffodils will be just beginning to bloom, thousands of them, planted by my mother in the meadow beyond the rose garden." It was her favorite season there. The mention of his mother, a subject he rarely discussed, piqued Eleanor's curiosity. "You have told me so little of her," she observed gently. "Yet I wear her ring, and shall soon live in the home she made. I should like to know her, at least through your memories." The carriage journey to Ravenshire Abbey took them north from London, through landscapes that gradually transformed from urban sprawl to gentle countryside. Eleanor watched the changing scenery with quiet delight, each mile carrying them further from the glittering constraints of society towards something she sensed would feel more genuinely like home. Arthur sat opposite her, occasionally indicating points of interest or sharing anecdotes connected to particular villages they passed. There was an ease to his manner outside the city, a loosening of the aristocratic reserve that had been, if not entirely absent, at least more pronounced amid London's formality. "We're approaching the southern boundary of the estate now," he said, as their carriage crested a hill in the late afternoon sun. "The land you see beyond that line of oaks has belonged to my family since the Restoration." Eleanor leaned forward, eager for her first glimpse of the domain that would soon be her responsibility as much as his. Rolling meadows dotted with sheep gave way to carefully managed woodlands. In the distance, the spire of what must be the village church rose above a cluster of stone cottages. "It's beautiful," she breathed, drinking in the pastoral scene with genuine appreciation. "This is merely the beginning," Arthur replied, a note of pride warming his voice. "Wait until you see the abbey itself." They passed through the village, Ravenshire Magna he called it, where cottagers paused in their evening activities to bow or curtsy as the ducal carriage rolled by. Eleanor noted with approval the neat appearance of the buildings, the small school with its playground, the absence of the grinding poverty she had too often witnessed in rural parishes during her father's ministry. "The people seem prosperous," she observed. "We try to ensure they are," Arthur confirmed. My father believed that a landowner's first duty was to those who lived and worked upon his soil. I have attempted to honor his philosophy, though there is always more to be done. Another mile brought them to massive wrought-iron gates, standing open between stone pillars topped with heraldic beasts. The carriage turned onto a winding drive that cut through parkland, dotted with ancient oaks. As they rounded a final curve, Ravenshire Abbey came into view. Eleanor gasped. The setting sun gilded the honey-colored stone of a building that straddled centuries, parts clearly medieval, with later additions in Tudor and Georgian styles that somehow merged into an organic whole rather than a discordant jumble. Mullioned windows caught the light like burnished gold, while ivy climbed portions of the facade in artful profusion. "Arthur," she whispered, momentarily forgetting formality in her awe. "It's magnificent." His expression as he watched her reaction held a vulnerability she had rarely glimpsed. "It has been many things through the centuries," he said quietly. "Monastery, fortress, sanctuary. I have always hoped it might one day be something I have never known it to be." "What?" Eleanor asked, curious at the uncharacteristic wistfulness in his tone. "A home," he answered simply. "Not merely a house or an estate or a symbol of position, but a true home." The carriage drew to a halt before wide stone steps leading to massive oak doors. Before the coachman could descend to assist them, the doors swung open to reveal a receiving line of servants, headed by an elderly man whose dignity rivaled Jenkins' own. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he intoned, as Arthur handed Eleanor down from the carriage. "We are most pleased to receive you and your honored guest." "Thank you, Graves," Arthur replied warmly. "Miss Whitcomb, may I present Mr. Graves, who has managed Ravenshire Abbey since before I was born. Graves, Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, who will shortly become your mistress as Duchess of Ravenshire." The butler bowed deeply. "We are all most gratified by the news, miss. If I may speak for the entire household, we wish you every happiness." Eleanor was touched by the sincerity in the old man's voice. "Thank you, Mr. Graves. I look forward to becoming better acquainted with everyone who makes this magnificent place function." A slight widening of the butler's eyes suggested that such democratic intentions were unusual, but his professional composure never wavered. "Indeed, miss. If you will follow me, tea awaits in the blue salon." His Grace's instructions were most specific regarding your comfort after the journey. The entrance hall through which they passed rose 3 stories to a painted ceiling depicting classical scenes. Portraits of Arthur's ancestors lined panelled walls, their aristocratic features displaying varying degrees of the same commanding presence he possessed. A grand staircase of carved oak dominated the far end, while corridors branched in multiple directions, hinting at the vastness of the house beyond. The blue salon proved to be a surprisingly intimate chamber, despite its lofty ceiling and tall windows overlooking formal gardens. A fire crackled welcomingly in a marble fireplace, dispelling the slight chill of early spring, while comfortable furnishings arranged for conversation rather than display suggested this was a room actually used rather than merely maintained for show. "This was my mother's favorite room," Arthur explained, as Eleanor settled onto a settee upholstered in faded blue damask. She found the formal drawing rooms oppressive and insisted on creating spaces where one might actually relax. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Eleanor observed, accepting a cup of tea from a maid who appeared as silently as a ghost. She was. Arthur's expression softened with memory. Unconventional in many ways, which scandalized my father's relatives but delighted him. He adored her eccentricities, her preference for gardening in old clothes, her habit of reading to the servants' children, her insistence on simplicity amid so much grandeur. "I wish I might have known her," Eleanor said softly. "You would have liked each other, I think." Arthur selected a small cake from the tray between them, his movements absent as his thoughts clearly dwelled in the past. "She valued authenticity above all else, a quality you possess in abundance." After refreshments, he led her on a tour of the principal rooms, the formal drawing room with its priceless artwork, the vast dining hall that could seat 100 guests, the picture gallery where generations of Ravenshires gazed from gilded frames with varying degrees of hauteur. Each space held treasures that would have graced a museum, yet Arthur spoke of them with the casual familiarity of one who had grown up amid such splendor. "And this," he said at last, pausing before carved double doors at the end of a long corridor, "is my favorite place in the entire abbey." He pushed the doors open to reveal a 2-story library that took Eleanor's breath away. Thousands of leather-bound volumes lined shelves that reached to the coffered ceiling, accessible by a wrought-iron spiral staircase and rolling ladders. Reading nooks with deep window seats punctuated the walls, while at the center, a massive partner's desk stood flanked by leather armchairs, worn to perfect comfort by generations of readers. "Oh," Eleanor breathed, moving into the space with the reverence of a pilgrim entering a cathedral. "This is overwhelming," Arthur suggested, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "Perfect," she corrected, turning to him with undisguised joy. "Absolutely perfect." His smile deepened at her response. "I hoped you would think so. I spent more of my childhood here than anywhere else in the house. When my mother died, it became a sanctuary of sorts, the place where I felt closest to her spirit." Eleanor moved to the nearest shelf, running her fingers gently along the spines of volumes, whose titles spoke of a collection assembled with care rather than mere ostentation. Philosophy, neighbor poetry, scientific treatises stood alongside novels, ancient classics beside modern thought, a library of genuine use rather than mere display. "You may add to it as you wish," Arthur said quietly. "It should reflect your mind, as well as those of my ancestors." The simple statement, acknowledgement that she would bring her own sensibilities to this ancient house, moved Eleanor deeply. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching slightly, "for sharing this with me, for believing I belong here." "You do belong here," he replied with sudden intensity, "more perhaps than anyone who has come before. Because you see beyond the trappings of wealth and title to the heart of what matters, the responsibility, the history, the potential for meaningful impact on those who depend upon this land and its stewardship." Night had fallen outside the tall windows, turning them into black mirrors that reflected the library's warm interior. Lamps had been lit while they toured the house, their golden glow creating pools of light that emphasized the room's comfortable intimacy despite its grand scale. "It's late," Arthur observed reluctantly. "You must be tired from the journey. Graves will have had your things taken to the Blue Suite, the chambers traditionally reserved for the Duchess, though of course after the wedding you may choose any rooms in the house that please you better." The reference to their impending marriage, now less than a month away, sent a flutter of anticipation through Eleanor. Their courtship, conducted under the watchful eyes of London society and her protective aunt, had maintained strict propriety, lingering glances and brief touches, the only physical expression of the deepening bond between them. Here, away from the city's rigid scrutiny, something shifted in the air between them. Arthur's gaze held hers with new intensity, the firelight casting his aristocratic features into stark relief. "And if what pleases me," Eleanor said softly, surprising herself with her boldness, "is to be wherever you are." Arthur's expression transformed at Eleanor's words, vulnerability and desire mingling in his gaze. For a moment he stood perfectly still, as though her quiet declaration had rendered him momentarily speechless. "Eleanor," he finally said, her name like a prayer on his lips, "you cannot know how I have longed to hear you speak such words." He crossed the space between them with deliberate steps, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the library's hushed atmosphere. With exquisite care, he took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles against her palms. "From the moment I saw you standing alone at Lady Merivale's ball," he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, "I have wished for you to feel that you belong at my side. Not as an ornament or a social accomplishment, but as my equal, my partner in all things." Eleanor felt the steady thrum of her heart accelerate at his proximity, at the tenderness in his touch. "I do feel that," she confessed, "though sometimes I still wake wondering if this is all an elaborate dream, from which I must eventually awaken." "Not a dream," Arthur assured her, raising one hand to gently touch her cheek. "Though I confess, reality has proven far sweeter than any dream I might have conjured." The crackling fire and distant ticking of a grandfather clock marked the passage of moments as they stood suspended in this new intimacy. Eleanor was acutely conscious of his nearness, of the slight tremor in his fingers as they brushed her skin, of the unspoken question in his eyes. "The wedding is but 3 weeks away," he said softly. "Soon enough there will be no barriers between us. But until then, I must remember my promise to honor your reputation in all things." With evident reluctance he stepped back, though his gaze remained fixed on her face, as though memorizing each feature. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice steadier now, "I should like to show you the gardens my mother created, and perhaps introduce you to some of the tenant families. They are eager to meet their future duchess." Eleanor smiled, simultaneously disappointed and relieved by his restraint. "I should like that very much." He offered his arm with formal correctness that belied the charged moment they had shared. "Shall I escort you to your chambers? I fear we've lingered rather late, and the Abbey can be confusing to navigate for newcomers." The journey through candlelit corridors and up the grand staircase passed in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of the future rapidly approaching. When they reached a set of double doors inlaid with blue enamel medallions, Arthur paused. "The Duchess's suite," he explained. redecorated by my mother when she arrived as a bride. No one has occupied it since her passing. A maid awaited within, Eleanor's belongings already unpacked and arranged with meticulous care. The sitting room through which they entered gave way to glimpses of a bedchamber beyond, where firelight played upon blue silk hangings and polished mahogany. "Is it to your liking?" Arthur asked, remaining respectfully near the doorway while Eleanor ventured further into the suite. "It's lovely," she replied truthfully. The rooms, while undeniably grand, possessed a welcoming warmth absent from many aristocratic chambers she had glimpsed during her London season. "Your mother had excellent taste. She would be pleased you think so." His gaze softened with memory. "She worried in her final illness that I might never find someone worthy of these rooms, someone who would understand what she had tried to create here." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "And have you found someone worthy?" "I have found someone far more than worthy," he answered without hesitation. "Someone who brings to these ancient walls exactly what they have lacked: genuine warmth, compassion, intelligence undiminished by privilege." He bowed then, a gesture of formal respect underscored by the intensity of his gaze. "Good night, Eleanor. Dream well in your new home." "Good night, Arthur," she replied softly. "Until tomorrow." After he departed, Eleanor explored her suite with growing appreciation for the woman who had created it. The bedchamber, dominated by a four-poster draped in blue silk, adjoined a dressing room where her modest collection of gowns hung amid empty spaces, awaiting the trousseau still being completed in London. A small writing desk, positioned near windows that would overlook the gardens at daybreak, suggested the previous Duchess had valued correspondence as much as Eleanor herself did. Most touching of all was a small bookshelf beside the bed, filled with volumes whose well-worn bindings spoke of frequent rereading. Poetry predominated: Wordsworth, Keats, Byron, but Eleanor also discovered novels, essays, and several volumes on horticulture. Selecting one at random, she opened it to find a bookplate bearing the inscription, "Catherine Eliza, Duchess of Ravenshire, 1845, Arthur's mother." Eleanor traced the elegant script with gentle fingers, feeling a connection across time to the woman who had loved these rooms, these books, the man who would soon be Eleanor's husband. Setting the volume carefully on the bedside table, she moved to the window, drawing back heavy curtains to gaze out at moonlit gardens beyond. Ravenshire Abbey slumbered around her, centuries of history settled into its stones like a comfortable garment. Yet for all its antiquity, Eleanor sensed possibility rather than stagnation within these walls, the chance to continue what Arthur's mother had begun, creating spaces of genuine warmth amid formal grandeur. The following days unfolded like the gradual opening of a precious gift, each revealing new facets of the life awaiting her. Arthur proved an attentive guide to his ancestral domain, showing her not only the formal aspects of the estate, but the working heart that sustained it. Home farms, tenant cottages, the village school he had endowed, the small hospital that provided care for all who lived under Ravenshire's protection. Eleanor met families whose connections to the land stretched back generations, whose lives were intimately intertwined with the Abbey's prosperity. She listened to their concerns, noted their needs, and began to form plans for improvements that would build upon Arthur's already exemplary stewardship. "You have a gift for this," he observed, as they rode back to the Abbey after a particularly productive visit to the village. "They speak to you openly, without the constraint they often show me despite my best efforts." "Perhaps because I understand what it is to live modestly," Eleanor replied. "The vicarage where I grew up was little grander than some of their cottages. My father's parishioners saw him as both superior and approachable, a balance I observed carefully." "And now apply with natural grace," Arthur added, his expression warm with admiration. "You will transform their lives, Eleanor, and mine, in ways I have only begun to comprehend." On the fifth day of their visit, Arthur led Eleanor to the meadow he had described, now a sea of golden daffodils nodding in the spring breeze, thousands upon thousands, stretching toward a distant line of trees. "Mother began with 100 bulbs," he explained, as Eleanor gasped at the magnificent display. "Each year she added more, until eventually the gardeners simply allowed them to naturalize. They bloom for only a few weeks, but she said their brief glory made them all the more precious." Eleanor knelt to touch one perfect bloom, its trumpet yellow against paler petals. "They're exquisite," she said softly, a fitting memorial to her vision. "I hoped you might think so." Arthur's voice held a note of nervous anticipation she had not heard before. "Which is why I thought this might be the perfect place." He paused, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet pouch. "The sapphire was traditional," he explained, as Eleanor rose to face him. "The engagement ring given to each Duchess of Ravenshire for 2 centuries, but this This belonged only to my mother. From the pouch, he drew a slender gold band etched with a continuous pattern of tiny flowers. Daffodils, he explained unnecessarily. Father had it made for their 10th anniversary. She never removed it, even at the end. Eleanor felt tears threatening as he held the ring between them. Arthur, I couldn't possibly, it's too precious, which is precisely why it should be yours, he interrupted gently. Not to replace your engagement ring, but to accompany it. A private token between us, signifying not the union of titles and estates, but of hearts. He took her left hand where the sapphire already gleamed. May I? At her tremulous nod, he slipped the gold band onto her finger, alongside the engagement ring. The two looked as though they had been designed as a pair, the ornate aristocratic sapphire complemented by the simple, deeply personal gold band. Perfect, he murmured, raising her hand to press a kiss against both rings, as I knew they would be. Eleanor looked up into his beloved face, finding in his expression everything she had ever hoped to inspire in another soul: tenderness, respect, desire, and abiding commitment. The rules of propriety that had governed their courtship seemed suddenly insubstantial against the reality of what had grown between them. Arthur, she began, uncertain how to express the tide of emotion rising within her. I never imagined such happiness could exist, especially for someone like me, who had resigned herself to a life of quiet duty and modest expectations. Then we have both been granted a miracle, he replied, drawing her gently into his arms. For I had equally resigned myself to a life of privilege without joy, position without purpose. As they stood amid the golden sea of flowers, the spring sun warm upon their faces, Eleanor felt the last vestiges of uncertainty dissolve. Whatever challenges awaited in the life they would build together, they would face them with the strength that came from genuine partnership. A bond forged not in social calculation, but in mutual recognition of the soul behind the surface. The remainder of their visit passed in a haze of deepening connection. Eleanor came to know each corner of the abbey, from the grandeur of state rooms to the comfortable chaos of the nursery where Arthur and his siblings had spent their childhood. She befriended the housekeeper, Mrs. Hollis, whose initial reserve melted into cautious approval as she recognized Eleanor's genuine interest in maintaining the house's traditions while bringing fresh perspective. Most evenings found them in the library, reading aloud from favorite volumes or discussing plans for their shared future. Arthur spoke of parliamentary reforms he hoped to advance, while Eleanor outlined visions for improving education for tenant children and healthcare for the elderly. We shall be quite the reforming influence, he observed with a smile that held both amusement and genuine enthusiasm. London society will be scandalized. Let them be, Eleanor replied, echoing words he had once spoken to her. Some causes are worth any cost. On their final evening at the Abbey, a letter arrived from London, an invitation to Lady Beatrice's own engagement ball to be held the week after Eleanor and Arthur's wedding. The groom-to-be was a wealthy baronet from Yorkshire, his principal qualification apparently the substantial fortune he had amassed in manufacturing. How unexpected, Eleanor remarked, scanning the elaborate card with its florid expressions of friendship and esteem. I would not have thought Lady Beatrice considered us among her intimate acquaintances. Arthur's expression combined amusement with cynical understanding. She doesn't. This is strategy, not sentiment. By including us in her celebration, she both acknowledges our higher rank and suggests there was never any real rivalry, a neat social calculation. Should we accept? Eleanor asked, genuinely uncertain of the proper response. Arthur considered, his expression thoughtful. I believe we should, not for her sake but for the message it sends, that we harbor no resentment, that we are secure enough in our happiness to wish her well in hers. Eleanor nodded, appreciating as always his instinctive understanding of the social currents that still sometimes mystified her. Very well. Our first formal engagement as husband and wife shall be to celebrate the woman who once tried her utmost to prevent our union. There is a certain poetic justice in that, I suppose. As the carriage carried them back toward London the next day, Eleanor watched Ravenshire Abbey recede into the distance with a curious mixture of reluctance and anticipation. Reluctance to leave the peace they had found within its walls, anticipation for the day, now less than a fortnight away, when she would return as its rightful mistress, as Arthur's wife in truth as well as promise. We shall come back soon, Arthur said, reading her thoughts with the uncanny perception that still sometimes startled her. After the wedding, after the obligatory rounds of social appearances, we shall retreat here for the summer months at least. I should like that, Eleanor replied, settling her hand in his as the journey continued. To begin our life together in the place where I first truly understood what home could mean. Arthur's fingers tightened around hers, his thumb brushing across the double rings that symbolized their commitment. "Not the beginning," he corrected gently. "A continuation of what began the moment our eyes met across Lady Merivale's ballroom." And as the distance grew between them and the Abbey, Eleanor found herself not looking back but forward to the extraordinary future that awaited them both. The daffodils had faded by the time Eleanor returned to Ravenshire Abbey, replaced by the first roses of early summer. They climbed stone walls with fragrant abundance, their varied hues forming a natural tapestry against weathered, honey-colored stone. The formal gardens had reached their zenith of geometrical perfection, while beyond them, meadows rippled with wildflowers beneath a perfect June sky. Eleanor stood at the window of what was now indisputably her bedchamber, watching as preparations continued for the afternoon's celebration. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, arranging tables beneath ancient oaks, hanging lanterns that would glow like earthbound stars when twilight fell, setting out chairs for the village children's choir that would perform as part of the festivities. 3 months had passed since she had pledged her life to Arthur's in the small chapel adjoining the abbey, a ceremony remarkable for its intimacy despite the illustrious guest list that had included half the aristocracy and several members of the royal family. Vows exchanged before God and witnesses had transformed Miss Eleanor Whitcomb into Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravenshire, a metamorphosis still occasionally startling in its scope. The London season that followed had been a whirlwind of obligatory appearances: presentation at court, attendance at Beatrice's surprisingly subdued engagement ball, formal dinners where Eleanor had taken her place at the head of tables with a composure that belied her private amazement at the turn her life had taken. Through it all, Arthur had remained her anchor, his quiet pride in her accomplishments, bolstering her confidence in settings that might once have overwhelmed her. Together they had navigated the treacherous waters of social expectation, emerging with reputation not merely intact, but enhanced by their evident devotion to one another. "Penny, for your thoughts?" The voice from the doorway drew Eleanor from her reverie. Arthur stood watching her, his formal morning attire exchanged for more comfortable country dress that suited him far better than the rigid tailoring London demanded. 3 months of marriage had softened the formal boundaries between them, replacing aristocratic reserve with comfortable intimacy. "I was thinking," Eleanor replied with a smile, crossing to meet him, "how fortunate I am to have found not only a husband, but a home worthy of the name." Arthur's arms encircled her with familiar warmth. "The home is only worthy because you are in it," he murmured against her hair. "Before you, it was merely a house, beautiful, but empty of true meaning." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, savoring the security it represented. Marriage had brought discoveries both profound and delightful. The tender consideration Arthur showed in their most intimate moments, the surprising humor that emerged when they were truly alone, the passionate conviction with which he approached causes that mattered to them both. "Are the preparations proceeding to your satisfaction?" he asked, glancing toward the window where activity continued in the gardens below. "Perfectly," Eleanor assured him. "Mrs. Hollis has orchestrated everything with military precision. The village children have practiced their songs until they know them by heart. Even the weather has obliged us with sunshine." "As well it should," Arthur replied with mock severity. "I am, after all, the Duke. Surely that counts for something with the elements." Eleanor laughed, the sound free and unrestrained in a way that would have shocked those who had known her only as the reserved daughter of a country vicar. "I fear even your exalted rank may not command the English weather, my love, but for today at least, fortune favours us." Today marked the formal opening of the Ravenshire School for Girls, Eleanor's first major initiative as Duchess, and one particularly close to her heart. The converted dower house at the edge of the estate would provide education for daughters of tenants and villagers alike, with curriculum extending beyond basic literacy to include subjects traditionally reserved for young ladies of higher birth. "Are you nervous?" Arthur asked, studying her face with the attentiveness that still sometimes took her breath away. "A little," Eleanor admitted. "It represents such a departure from tradition. Some of the older tenants seemed skeptical that their daughters needed more than rudimentary skills. They will come to understand its value," Arthur assured her, taking her hands in his, "as my father's tenants came to appreciate his agricultural innovations, despite initial resistance. Progress requires vision, Eleanor, a quality you possess in abundance." The assurance warmed her, as his faith always did. "We should go down," she said, reluctantly disengaging from his embrace. Lady Merivale's carriage was spotted on the road, and Reverend Stillwell mentioned he would arrive early to bless the building before the ceremony. They descended the grand staircase together, the afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across ancient flagstones. Servants curtsied or bowed as they passed, their respectful greetings now tinged with genuine affection rather than mere obligation. Outside, the June day enfolded them in warmth and subtle fragrance. Eleanor paused to admire the transformation of the gardens under her direction. Formal patterns softened with cottage flowers, rigid geometries relaxed into more natural flow that better complemented the Abbey's organic evolution through centuries. "Your mother would approve, I think," she observed, glancing at a particularly successful integration of wild roses among more cultivated varieties. "This balance of tradition and innovation, she would adore it," Arthur agreed, "almost as much as she would have adored you." They walked arm in arm toward the converted dower house, where a small crowd had already begun to gather. Village children in their Sunday best stood in nervous formation, rehearsing songs under the choirmaster's direction. Parents in carefully brushed coats and freshly ironed dresses waited with the particular patience of those accustomed to standing respectfully before their betters. Yet as Eleanor approached, she noted with quiet satisfaction that the deference in their manner was tempered now with genuine warmth. These 3 months had given her opportunity to know them as individuals rather than abstractions, to visit their homes, listen to their concerns, and begin the work of genuine improvement in their daily lives. Lady Merivale emerged from her carriage at the entrance to the school grounds, her imposing figure resplendent in a gown of summer green. "Your Grace," she greeted Eleanor, with a curtsy that managed to convey both proper respect and friendly affection. "What a marvelous day for your triumph." "Hardly a triumph yet," Eleanor demurred. "The real success will be measured in years to come, when these girls find paths previously closed to them." "Precisely the sort of long view that confirms my initial assessment of you," Lady Merivale replied with approval. "London still buzzes with speculation about the transformation of the invisible Miss Whitcomb into the most discussed Duchess in recent memory." "Let them buzz," Arthur interjected, his tone light but with underlying seriousness. "We have more important matters to attend to than society's chatter." The ceremony itself unfolded with affecting simplicity. Reverend Stillwell blessed the building with prayers that emphasized wisdom and opportunity, rather than mere conformity to established order. The children's choir performed with endearing enthusiasm, if imperfect harmony. Eleanor cut a ribbon stretched across the entrance, officially opening doors both literal and metaphorical to futures previously unimagined. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit among the trees, transforming the gardens into an enchanted realm where tenant farmers and aristocrats mingled with unprecedented ease. Eleanor moved among them all, her natural dignity now complemented by the assurance that came with recognized position. "You have created something remarkable here," observed Aunt Pembroke, who had arrived from London for the occasion. "Not merely the school, though that is achievement enough. This," she gestured toward the diverse gathering, where ancient social barriers seemed temporarily dissolved in shared celebration, "this is truly revolutionary." "Revolution suggests destruction of the old order," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "I prefer to think of it as evolution, preserving what is valuable in tradition while allowing necessary growth and change." Her aunt studied her with newfound respect. "You have grown into your role with surprising grace, Eleanor. I confess, I harbored doubts when this extraordinary match was first proposed." "As did I," Eleanor acknowledged with a smile. "It seemed too improbable to be real, let alone lasting." "And yet," her aunt observed, glancing toward Arthur, who stood deep in conversation with Reverend Stillwell, "one has only to see you together to recognize the rightness of the connection. It transcends considerations of rank or fortune." "It does," Eleanor agreed softly, "though I am not so unworldly as to imagine those considerations irrelevant. Arthur's position has given me opportunity to effect changes I could only have dreamed of as a vicar's daughter. And your influence has given his position meaning beyond mere inheritance," her aunt countered. "A fair exchange, I should say." As the evening deepened into night, guests gradually departed, lanterns were extinguished, and silence reclaimed the ancient grounds. Eleanor and Arthur walked alone through moonlit gardens, the Abbey rising before them like a guardian presence, its windows glowing with welcome. "Happy?" Arthur asked simply, his arm around her waist as they paused to gaze at their home. "Beyond measure," Eleanor replied truthfully, "though I still sometimes wonder what might have happened had you not seen me that night, had you not chosen to defy convention with those first steps across Lady Merivale's ballroom. I would have found you eventually," he said with quiet certainty. "Some connections, Eleanor, are written in the stars long before we recognize them ourselves." She turned within the circle of his arms to face him, her expression visible in the gentle moonlight. then I am grateful for stars and fate and whatever forces brought us together, but most of all, for the courage that made you cross that room and say, "Let them watch." Arthur finished, echoing words spoken months ago that had altered both their destinies, the wisest 3 words I ever uttered. And as they walked the final distance home, the abbey welcoming them with light and warmth against the darkness, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as a moment's defiance had transformed into a lifetime's devotion. A love story, written not in fleeting passion, but in the enduring language of mutual respect, shared purpose, and hearts that had recognized in each other their perfect complement. In the world they were building together, both ancient walls and human lives would be transformed, not by destruction of the old, but by thoughtful integration of the new. A balance as delicate and beautiful as the roses climbing the abbey's weathered stone, as powerful and enduring as the foundations upon which it stood. In a world that often values appearance over substance and position over character, true worth may be found in unexpected places. Eleanor's journey reminds us that dignity is not bestowed by social rank, but cultivated through inner strength and moral conviction. Arthur's choice demonstrates that genuine happiness comes not from following convention, but from recognizing authentic connection. Their story teaches us that meaningful transformation, whether of individuals, relationships, or societies, requires both respect for valuable traditions and courage to challenge harmful constraints. Like the abbey itself, with its ancient foundations and evolving architecture, the most enduring creations blend reverence for the past with vision for the future. Above all, "No one asked her to dance" reminds us that love at its most powerful is not merely romantic attraction, but a partnership of equals who recognize in each other not just who they are, but who they might become together. In choosing Eleanor, Arthur found not only a wife, but a purpose larger than himself. In accepting Arthur, Eleanor gained not merely security, but the opportunity to affect lives beyond her own. The true happy ending lies not in the trappings of wealth or title, but in the creation of a union where both parties emerge stronger, wiser, and more fully themselves than they could ever have been alone. Did this story touch your heart? Would you like to experience more romantic tales where love conquers social barriers and transforms lives? Subscribe to our channel now for weekly Victorian romance stories featuring strong heroines, noble heroes, and the timeless power of love that defies convention. Each tale is crafted with rich historical detail and emotional depth to transport you to a world of grand estates, intimate moments, and characters whose journeys will inspire your own. Don't miss our next captivating story. Click the subscribe button, enable notifications, and join our community of romance enthusiasts who believe in the enduring power of love to overcome all obstacles. Your next literary escape is just one click away.